The silver and purple of House Mallister has long been the least welcoming sight to an Ironborn raider, and anyone who makes the Ironborn think twice about the things they do is someone you want on your side in a fight, or just in general. This is a house as proud as houses get, but it's a different kind of pride. It's the pride of accomplishment, the kind of pride you earn. The kind of pride we can look back on your family history and say, yeah, we've been doing it right. Not the kind where you just feel and act superior just because your ancestors were powerful and or rich. Well, to be fair, there's some of that too, but that first part, I think, is a big difference maker. Like a lot of houses, we get to explain and or consider their position in history throughout a number of eras, right? But unlike a lot of houses, they're pretty different from the rest in their respective region. It's difficult to disrespect House Mallister, many accomplishments, few scandals, frequent honors, rare failures, but I will be drawing a lot of comparisons in this episode about how they're really not the same. They're different than a lot of other Riverlands houses, and in a lot of ways they would fit better in a different region, something we'll delve into. How did they get this reputation? Why are they held in such high regard? Why do I think they might fit better elsewhere? Well, they're above the rest. That's their motto, and they do live up to it quite well. So that's going to be a big part of this. Though their past is rich, we have A Song of Ice and Fire to discuss as well. This is a house that has managed to conserve most of their strength throughout the War of Five Kings. That positions them to do things whereas other houses might be a bit incapable. They're spent. There's been no change of lordship with House Mallister during the series, and the man in charge is as strong as he is capable. Looks to me like George's, he's got them in mind for some Endgame of Thrones action or something along those lines. And they're close, very close geographically to the twins. They've got a problem with Black Walder right now. He's kind of holding them captive in their own castle. What do they think of Euron? I mean, they're supposed to be all about fighting the Ironborn, and they got this kind of new breed Ironborn that frankly doesn't really care about them too much. So what do they think of him? And what about Patrick Mallister's friendship with Theon? That's a most unusual connection. Does that mean anything? Is that going to play out some way? And the Mallisters know who Robb named as heir. They were involved in his will. Does that mean they might go north at some point to fight an even more dangerous enemy? All that and more on this episode of History of Westeros podcast. Hello and welcome. It's time to talk about House Mallister, the Silver Eagles with their purple background above the rest, all proud and cool like that. Every Sunday, just about, we're here at 3 p.m. Eastern, live streaming on YouTube. You can catch the edited version on all podcast platforms, including the video edited version on Spotify about a week later. And every time you can catch us on any podcast platform that exists, pretty much, maybe one or two that we haven't found yet. We're working on that, but we're on most of them. And there's always new ones popping up here and there. But we're also ad-free if you check us out on Patreon. A big shout out to our friend Nina. She had some excellent additions to this episode. It's also her birthday week, so shout out, happy birthday to Good Queen Allie. goodqueenallie.tumblr.com is where you can find her on the internets. And the current post over on her blog is discussing the clans of the Vale, what future they might have. And she actually expands the answer to include some of the other clans outside of the Vale to take a bigger look at the whole thing. It's a good answer. You're going to want to check that out along with the rest of her posts. This is Topics Moot 2026 episode number 2. Thank you all for voting for this. Those of you who participated in Topics Moot, we got 12 topics voted on this year that will be made. This is the second one. House Fossaway was number 1. And I really enjoyed thinking through Mallister history just like I did Fossaway. Very different experiences, a few things in common, but quite a lot not so much. So I'm very happy that I get to do that and use my imagination and think it all through. If you have questions for us or think we missed something or just want to give us a shout out or have something you want to say, hit us up at westeroshistory@gmail.com or hit us on any of our socials. We're pretty much everywhere you can find us. We're everywhere you can find us. Everywhere you can find social media platforms, you should be able to find us. Our trivia question for the day. Answer's going to be at the end, as usual. The third house mentioned in all of A Song of Ice and Fire in Book 1 is the Mallisters. Name one or both of the two that get named before Mallister. That's right, there are two mentioned before Mallister in that their prologue. What are they? This episode actually has a lot of sections, more than usual, partly because there's just a lot of different things the Mallisters are involved with. Most of these are shorter sections, so we'll be doing tidbit here, tidbit there, but they're all linked. They're very consistent. That makes for very fun comparisons across eras and makes the exceptions all the more exceptional. So we'll get started with first mention and first appearance, as we so often do. Then the Andal Eagles, the Cape of Eagles, Seagard, Mallister culture, Old Stones, House Justman, the Storm Kings, the Freys and the Crossing, the Eagles in Shame. Then we get to Eagles Under the Dragons, Eagles Can Dance Too, The Last Reaver, A Tragic Friendship, A Song of Ice and Fire in Eagles, Jeffrey Mallister, Lord Jason, Balon's Rebellion, The Whispering Wood and the Battle of the Camps, The Kingdom of the North, The Pallbearer, The Witness, The Red Wedding, Mallister versus Pike, Under Black Walder, and finally, Where Eagles Dare, to finish it all off. Like I said, a lot of short sections, a bunch of different things that the Mallisters are involved with here and now, so let's get to it. With that first mention, I told you with the trivia question, the third ever house mentioned in A Song of Ice and Fire is House Mallister. Obviously, that means the prologue, right? We're not sitting here around waiting for several chapters before these names get dropped. Let's have that quote where they're mentioned. Here it is.
Will had been a hunter before he joined the Night's Watch. Well, a poacher, in truth. Mallister free riders had caught him red-handed in the Mallister's own woods. Skinning one of the Mallister's own bucks. And it had been a choice of putting on the black or losing a hand. No one could move through the woods as silent as Will, and it had not taken the Black brothers long to discover his talent.
This is something you might pick up on reread. Not all houses / lords would offer the wall as the penalty. That's fallen off. Certainly in the north, it's common still, if not ubiquitous. But elsewhere, not so much. I mean, there's still a lot of lords that offer the black. But I mean, look at what happened at the end of the Dance of the Dragons. Until one person thought of it, no one had even brought it up. One of the Kingsguard was like, I want to take the black. And a bunch of other people were like, oh yeah, it actually wasn't the Kingsguard. It was Perkin the Flea, I think it was. And I bet all of a sudden when the idea was floated, a bunch of other people said, oh yeah, I want to take the black. That's a great idea. Let's do that. It just goes to show how that's kind of fallen off. But the Mallisters, very traditional. And Dennis Mallister is the commander of the Shadow Tower. They literally have a representative nearly at the top living there and giving an example of a different type of service, a different type of duty. That's actually something we'll get into later, how the Wall and fighting against Ironborn raiders, there's a lot they have in common there. And of course, the Mallisters, by extension, would have a positive view of such a thing. People whose job it is to defend the realm against raiders, well, that's what they do, right? So the Night's Watch, Seagard, already you've got something very, very central in common there. Duty, defense, right? And this sentence passed on Will, it would have been passed by Lord Jason Mallister himself. You can't have stewards and administrators sentencing people to the wall. That is for the Lord and only the Lord, or maybe the heir, right? You don't have like maesters and like imagine Vian Poole or Sir Rodrik. You can't do that unless you're appointed Castellan. And even then they're right. They didn't want to execute sentence on who they thought was Reek. It was actually Ramsay, of course, but they couldn't hang him because that's for Robb to do. It's not their purview. They don't have the authority to pass sentence like that. But of course, in this moment, Will is only thinking about the Mallisters. He's not seeing them, or they're not present. By the way, nice little joke there. He was caught red-handed. I'm sure his hands were actually bloody. He was skinning a buck. There you go. That's about as red-handed as it gets. Anyway, let's move on to their first appearance. It's Catelyn's point of view when we see them. It's a good place to start because she is the daughter of Hoster Tully. Catelyn knows the Mallisters well. Hoster was the Mallister's liege lord for a long time. Now it's Edmure. They would have gone to Riverrun plenty of times. And we know Catelyn's been to Seagard. She remembers... Well, she doesn't remember being there. Well, I'm sure she does, but it's not what we hear about. The memory we get is of her on the way to Seagard. So we know, unless something happened, they went the rest of the way. Her memory is actually pretending to be Jenny of Oldstones, because they stop at Oldstones on the way. And of course, young Peter Baelish pretends to be Duncan the Small. How dare he? Well, at least he was small. That part's accurate. When we actually meet Lord Jason in this Catelyn chapter, the circumstances are nothing like her going to visit Seagard as the daughter of the liege lord. It's very different. Here we go. Quote.
They followed the sounds around a lazy bend of the road and saw them, a column of armed men noisily fording a swollen stream. Catelyn reined up to let them pass. The banner in the hand of the foremost rider hung sodden and limp, but the guardsmen wore indigo cloaks, and on their shoulders flew the silver eagle of Seagard. Mallisters, Sir Rodrik whispered to her, as if she had not known. My lady, best pull up your hood. Catelyn made no move. Lord Jason Mallister himself rode with them, surrounded by his knights, his son Patrick by his side, and their squires close behind. They were riding for King's Landing in the Hand's Tourney, she knew.
No word on Patrick, but Lord Jason actually does pretty well in the tournament. I don't think Patrick actually competed. He's not Sir Patrick. So, yeah, it's generally... Maybe he's a couple years away from being ready for that, even though he was ready shortly after this to be one of Robb's personal guard. Either way, we don't get a full accounting of how the tournament goes. It just sort of skips ahead at some point. We know that Lord Jason beats Sir Aaron Santagar, and then it came down to 4. The Hound, the Mountain, Sir Jaime, and Loras Tyrell. So, yeah, at some point Jason loses, but we don't know. If you're thinking about Ashford Meadow, which a lot of us are, because whenever a tournament comes up, that one pops into my head. There weren't any Mallisters at Ashford Meadow. They do like tournaments. They're frequent attendees to tournaments, as this example shows us. But interestingly enough, that was maybe a wise move on their part to not beat the tournament. Not that it would have been such a big deal to take a few weeks off or whatever, but around the time of Ashford Meadow, not long after is when Dagon Greyjoy gets going, and that might have been a lot of effort for the Mallisters, although it's also possible Dagon Greyjoy just kind of avoided them. We'll see. We'll get to that part in good due time here. This next paragraph, still sticking with this Catelyn chapter, is pretty significant as well, because we actually get a description of Lord Jason, the Lord of Seagard. Here it is. Quote.
She studied Lord Jason boldly. The last time she had seen him, he had been jesting with her uncle at her wedding feast. The Mallisters stood bannermen to the Tullys, and his gifts had been lavish. His brown hair was salted with white now, his face chiseled gaunt by time. Yet the years had not touched his pride. He rode like a man who feared nothing. Catelyn envied him that. She had come to fear so much. As the riders passed, Lord Jason nodded, a curt greeting. But it was only a High Lord's courtesy to strangers chance met on the road. There was no recognition in those fierce eyes, and his son did not even waste a look.
This is followed by some dialogue where Sir Rodrik is surprised that they weren't recognized, especially Lady Catelyn not recognized. But she responds that that's just how it is. They're not going to bother looking at peasants. That's what they saw. They see peasants. They're not going to... The last thing in their mind is, I wonder if that's a highborn person in disguise. It just does not cross their mind. But that's interesting, too, that Jason is the example here. It's not because there's something wrong with him. This isn't an insult to him, right? Like I just made the point. It would be pretty weird for him to be curious about that, about random peasants on the road. There's nothing bad about it, right? It's just normal, right? I don't pass people on the subway and wonder if there's someone in disguise, So And this is important as early setup because there's a lot of characters who go around in disguise, not just POVs, but other people, and including Catelyn's own daughters, right? We got Cat and Elaine. They're incognito using half of her name, right? Cat and Elaine, Cat of the Canals. And this is neat how she and her daughters are experiencing these different things and making use of it in the same way, allowing this to work for them, allowing the fact that nobles don't bother to look at peasants and using that to their advantage. Lord Jason is somewhere between older than he looks and has aged well, right? This is the presentation of a man leading a house with a proud warrior tradition. George isn't trying to be too subtle here. He looks like the man he is. Like the description sort of matches the character here. That's not always the case, but in this time it is. These are guys who defend against the worst of the worst. That's their entire life, their entire tradition, their raison d'etre, why they're there, right? To do what you are, to be a defender against the Ironborn means constant vigilance, toughness, bravery. You got to be training, you got to be in shape. Yeah, I mean, that's a tough job. So this is something I'm going to get at off and on this entire episode. This is a house that's very proud, but they have a very good reason to be proud, right? They have a tough job. They've done it well. And it's one of the most esteemed things you can be in Westeros is a good fighter, but someone who doesn't use that for evil or for villainy or for undue gain, right? So Lord Jason, yeah, he looks the part, right? He's a chip off the old eagle block. He looks like the avatar of what a Lord of Seagard should look like. I'm not as sure about Patrick Mallister, though. We'll come back to him again. We're trying to go chronologically here. This is just our intro. But yeah, Patrick, he doesn't quite come off the same as his father. I did say he's young, so maybe he'll change. Maybe he's more of a chip than I'm saying. But yeah, like I said, we'll come back to that. Now, there may have been first men Mallisters, but they weren't noteworthy if so. It doesn't seem like it, though. They really just come off like Andal nobility that has been Andal nobility for a long time. That is their vibe. That's through and through. They come off that way. What's a little unusual about them is that they were kings, so that gives them a little extra measure of pride, maybe a big extra measure of pride. But they weren't first men kings. And they weren't kings right away when the Andal, that's what happened with the Andals. A lot of Andals came in, became kings, took over a lot of these kingdoms. The Mallisters became kings after that. Like, a lot of the Andals had moved in. The Mallisters became kings during that period after a lot of the other Andal warlords had already been established. So that's a little unusual, but also it was because they're good at fighting. And it was also because they didn't fight against other Andal warlords. They fought against the Ironborn, which, that means they're not getting involved in conflict with their own people, so to speak. Now, eventually, the Mallisters submitted to greater Andal kings, but I'm not sure it was through force. They may have just marriage alliance style. Like, who wants to take on, in a campaign, the house that is made their whole life beating the Ironborn? Like, that's not such a pushover house. Of all the houses in the Riverlands, the Mallisters are one of the least ones I'd want to tangle with, because of that's all they do is fight Ironborn, right? Like, these guys are good at fighting. Good against fighting against people who are really good against fighting, too. So, yeah. The Andal Eagles. The idea that the Mallisters began as an Andal house makes a lot of sense, beyond what I've already said. During the intro, I pointed out that they don't necessarily fit in the Riverlands in a certain way. Like, in certain ways, they fit perfectly. They are crucial to the Riverlands' existence the way it is. Like, without them, I don't know, Ironborn might have had a lot more success against the Riverlands, and the Riverlands might be a much different place today. But if I said that they were a Vale house, or that they originated in the Vale, which they didn't, as far as I know, but if they said they were a Vale house, it would fit. They would be perfect fit for that, right? Don't they seem like a great match for like a Bronzion Royce, that kind of value system, the like proud, upfront, straightforward, not mincing words, no intrigue, right? Just solid, right? And with all the pride and there's no lack of, there's no examples of things that normally come from the First Men Riverlands houses, like the Brackens and the Blackwoods, their ancient rivalry, right? It's just, there's the Seagard's rivalry is against the Ironborn, right? And going back to the Blackwoods in a different way. The history of First Men blood means things like skin changing and other supernatural things, connections to the old gods. Mallisters don't have any of that. That's just not their bag. They're a knightly house, which again, that's the Vale is the heart of knightly houses that have no connection to supernatural. The Reach is where the other seat of chivalry is, right? But the Reach has all these connections to Garth Greenhand and these semi-legendary, if not mythical figures. There's a lot of supernatural in that background. Mallisters don't have that. Eagles were supposedly at the command of Sir Artis Arryn. That fits better, right? They sound like they belong there. Eagles' nests get made really high. They're called eyries, for God's sake. An eagle's nest is called an eyrie. Like the Eyrie. So yeah, you see where I'm going with this. Seagard, in a way, could be like the bloody gate of the Riverlands. It's maritime rather than orogenous. Yes, orogenous, meaning to do with mountains. Yeah, fancy word there. Cape of Eagles. On the other side of Westeros, the eastern side, there's the fingers, right? The Cape of Eagles is kind of like a thumb, or maybe some other appendage, pointed directly at the Iron Isle as if to say, that's who we care about. Like this. Is it pointing this way? Well, yeah, see right over here, pointing at the Ironborn. It's this way, and then on the map that way. Pointing the thumb that way. It's a full-time job, right? You can't just casually take care of the Ironborn. So the name Cape of Eagles implies that eagles live there, probably in good numbers, which also implies that there's some hills or mountains there at the Cape of Eagles, which is another thing that's different, right? The Riverlands isn't known for its mountains. But eagles need high places. That's where they live. So that's another thing that's feels more germane to the Vale, right? Again, that comes up. Hills, maybe though. Also, definitely forest. We know the Cape of Eagles is forests. It's not a highly populated area, probably, but surely people do live there. This is probably where the eagle sigil came from. This is why it's kind of notable that a lot of houses came with a sigil already, or they adopted a new one. They did house words. This is just very clearly tied to the area where they became established. It'd be quite a coincidence if otherwise. They're like, hey, we're the Mallisters. We've just come over from Andalos. Where do the eagles live in this country? Let's go there. We're going to go there. Wherever they are, we're going to go meet up with our mascots. So these are probably sea eagles, by the way, that hunt fish off the Cape there. There's a lot of different types of eagles. It's kind of a loose term, eagle. I doubt Westeros is particularly deep on the science there. So it's just whatever looks like an eagle to them is an eagle, but still close enough. And yeah, eagles do fishing there. A lot of Mallisters do fishing too. And they got to watch out for those Ironborn. It was none other than Torgon Greyiron, a.k.a. Torgon the Latecomer, the one who missed the King's Moot and then contested the Seastone Chair because he missed the King's Moot unfairly. He won and was a powerful king, and his descendants follow him without having to win King's Moots of their own. But he could not hold the Cape. He could not hold the Cape of Eagles despite being a capable and strong Ironborn king. It was the Mallisters who took it from him. And after his reign, they claimed the rest. They took most of the Cape of Eagles from him during his reign, and then the rest, I suppose, in the next reign or two. And that's when they became kings. So again, they didn't incur any enmity from other Riverlands houses because they didn't say, hey, I want your land. And they said, no, we're going to come in here and take land from the Ironborn and make a kingdom out of that. That's respectable. A lot of other Riverlords would be like, cool. Not only would they respect that, but they'd just be like, hey, these guys just set up a defensive position between our lands and the Ironborn. Hell yeah. That's great. What a windfall. These guys that just decided to set up and fight the Ironborn, that's great for everyone. Why wouldn't you like that if you're their neighbors? So they came in as the best neighbor possible, basically. Like, hey, I'm going to come in here, be friendly to you, and fight your enemies. Hell yeah, right? That's great. So I suspect that it was one of the more welcome additions to the Riverlands, if not the most welcome, because they weren't trying to fight any of the other First Men or Andals. They were just trying to fight Ironborn. Technically, Ironborn are First Men and Andal, but you get what I'm saying. Different religion, different culture. It's all that. So I suspect the Cape of Eagles and maybe a little more to the north was their domains when they were kings. because south of their domains is where there was a lot of established power already. If I'm talking about how they were able to expand into previously uncivilized or Ironborn held areas, well, they're not going to expand south because that's where Old Stones was. That's where the kings of House Mud were. And of course, to the east, there's Bracken and Blackwood and Tully to the southeast and a lot of other very powerful Riverlands houses that the Mallisters apparently never had any major long-term wars with. I'm sure there's been some issues. I'm sure it wasn't just all perfect all the time. But for the most part, they're a great neighbor, and they're not going to be picking on you, and you don't want to mess with them because they're so good at fighting. Like, who picks on the Mallisters other than Ironborn? Even the Ironborn avoid them a lot of times, as we'll see. So the Cape of Eagles is a perfect example, right? It was a real accomplishment, taking that from the Ironborn, but not just taking it, holding it, right? It's the constant depredations and raiding and striking as if from nowhere that make places like this unlivable. So I suspect the Mallisters, well, they just can't defend every inch of coastline. There's no ports on the Cape of Eagles, nothing big anyway, so I suspect they just adapted and said, hey, y'all, stop fishing, go hunting, go inland, farm, do things that the Ironborn can't get so easily to your lands. Let's live in like a couple miles inland where they have a harder time raiding us. You know, things like that, natural adaptations rather than, you can't just fight everything. You know, so the Ironborn have their advantages and you can't give in to that. You have to set your kingdom up or your region up in a way that makes it harder for them. Fishing is life for a lot of people. So you got to protect against that. So you have to also defend the coasts, but you also have to make it that every single fishing village, well, you can't defend them all. So you got to do something about that. Of course, I mentioned earlier hunting instead of fishing. Well, don't do that in the Mallister only woods or you'll end up like Will. Well, probably not as a white, but on the wall. Yeah. Seagard itself. Let's keep the map in mind here. Ashaya's got some nice different versions of our favorite maps to show you what we're looking at here. Seagard isn't actually on the Cape of Eagles. It's like right below it. If you use my earlier example of it like a thumb, it's like the base of the palm, like the final knuckle. Not that far from the neck, which is a good thing. The neck isn't bothering them and they're not bothering the neck. It's like the Freys, where the Freys are antagonistic towards the Crannogmen. There's no evidence or history that we know of where the Mallisters would pick a fight with the Crannogmen or vice versa. And why would they? It's silly. Why would you want to fight them? And why would the Mallisters want to fight anybody else when they're so busy with the Ironborn? So I think they probably just left each other alone. They may have even been friendly neighbors. But then, you know, nowadays the Freys have since moved in. I mean, that was 600 years ago. But in ancient times, there weren't any Freys. And it may have been more of a direct line between Crannogmen and Mallisters. But I don't know what that would have looked like. Still, it's a defensive-minded castle. They're not interested in swamps and bogs, right? It's not probably as extreme as Castle Black Seagard is, where Castle Black isn't defensible from the south, which was kind of intentionally designed that way. I'm sure Seagard is somewhat concerned with their eastern neighbors, even though the Ironborn are their main thing. The coastline in general, south of Seagard, is very fertile. I suspect they controlled less of it in ancient times, maybe even more of it now, because Old Stones would have ruled a lot of that. And now there's just nothing there. Old Stones is just a ruin, and there's no one really has a lot of sway over those lands. So I think Mallister by default have a lot of that. Now they have something called the Booming Tower, which is a really tall tower, like it sounds, in Seagard that has a huge bronze bell within it. And they ring it whenever long ships are sighted. It's probably really high up because you would want to be able to see the ships from as far away as possible, and you want the sound to travel as far as possible too. It's probably pretty high up there, right? Above the rest. And this is not a job for random guardsmen. I feel like, yeah, I'm using my imagination here. Maybe this is a stretch, but I think this is probably close to what it looks like. It's a job. It's a dutiful, important job. It's an honor to be a watchman at the Booming Tower. It's the whole purpose of this place's existence is to guard against the Ironborn, and this is the first line of defense. This isn't the kind of job where you fall asleep on watch, for one thing, because I doubt it's just one person. I bet it's a group, maybe a squad of 12, where you got a captain, a couple of lieutenants, or a second in command, a sergeant, something like that, and you got people who are constantly just looking out in all directions, and they're proud of that job. And if someone is not good at it, they get sleepy, they're not vigilant enough, well, you get replaced. You find someone else who's willing to do that job and is good at it. And given the vibe of the Mallisters, hundreds, if not thousands of years of fighting the Ironborn, you got young people probably signing up for that job. It's probably a legitimate honor. You might get a special badge. Maybe it's like something like a lot of nations in the real world or whatever have had compulsory military service. I'm not just talking about drafts, but that is a version of that. Plenty of countries where you have to serve in the military for a few years. I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case with the Mallisters. Well, we're a military region. We have fighting as our business. We're a defensive culture here. So I don't know if they're forcing people in. They might be, but it's very likely a lot of people are proud to join it, even if they are forced. But I'm guessing that they might not need to force people. That people just join because they want to, because they want to wear the silver and purple. They want to have that eagle on them. They want to be part of the thing that this culture, this local region is most proud of. Yeah, like people would sit back in the tavern and reminisce about their 2 to 3 years of duty on the booming tower. And just like they'd all have something in common. We all did that 2 to 3 to 4 years of service there. Maybe there's a lot of other bells. Like what besides the booming tower, is there more? Right? If the booming tower goes off, that probably sends a signal elsewhere. There's probably other towers, lesser bells that ring in concordance with that to spread the word. I don't know if one bell is enough, right? Let everybody know. Not the entire Mallister region won't hear this bell. Maybe the ones, farther inland don't need to hear it, but they probably do. You want to rush and defend it, right? This is all hands on deck, without the deck kind of moment. They have their patrol ships out there too. Like these ships would be looking for long ships, and if they see one, I bet they have ravens. Just let a raven go. It goes back to Seagard, and there's no way the Ironborn can stop that message from getting there. It's a great system of warning. I think that sounds like really efficient, really effective. I'm sure they'd rather use eagles than ravens, but it doesn't work that way. Now, Lord Jason currently says, during the War of Five Kings, he tells Robb that he has 2 warships and 6 longships. Not a huge fleet. But I bet prior to Aegon's conquest, when the Ironborn had free reign, I bet the Lords of Seagard kept larger fleets. Maybe not huge, nothing like the Arbor, but more than 2 warships and 6 longships. Because once Aegon conquered the Ironborn and the rest of Westeros, well, he put an end to the old way. Obviously, it wasn't completely ended. There's always people here and there, but it was no longer a state-sponsored activity, and that's a big, big drop-off. And so that Seagard would have a little bit less to do. They seem to have a lot of longbowmen. That's the thing we hear of Mallister bowmen a couple different times throughout the War of Five Kings. And that really makes sense. If you got ships coming to shore to attack you and you see them come in, well, that's one of the best things you can do before they land is shoot at them. And, longbows are something you can train. Maybe people who aren't as brave as everybody else. You're shooting at a distance. Not everybody is capable of charging with a sword and fighting Ironborn hand to hand. But you can put the bow in the hands of a lot of different people and they can be effective without having to come into close quarters. Standing on top of a wall, shooting down. You don't need to be super brave to participate in the defense on those terms. Though we don't know what it looks like, Seagard, I picture the interior as a chronology of Mallister heroism. Again, a warrior, defensive-minded culture is going to take pride in its success on those terms. How many Mallister knights and lords and a few kings personally slew Ironborn champions? Well, we know of one in recent times, we'll talk about. These are the sorts of stories in a place like this that never die. These are the things you would make tapestries of, paintings. When Lord blankety blank Mallister killed bloggity blob Greyjoy in single combat, that would be a day to remember, and they would make sure it was remembered. With poetry, with writing, with maybe even performances, plays, things like that. Definitely ornaments on the wall. Like, that was his shield. That was the sword that slew this Ironborn Reaver, that put an end to this raid, or the King Greyjoy himself was slain by... Yeah, we're talking eons of history here. There's got to be a substantial amount of... Well, think about, who comes to mind here is Sir Eustace Osgray, a man who lives in the past because he has no present and no future. That's what the Mallisters would be if they didn't still have a purpose, most likely. They would be... Their current lord would just be a sad man looking at the past, cleaning the shields of warriors who died 300 years ago. Only he remembers their stories. Mallisters aren't faced with that because the Ironborn are still a threat. They're not going anywhere. They still have that purpose. So they aren't like they aren't faded glory. They're not a relic of the past. They still have a purpose, and that is huge. If you don't have a purpose, well, in the real world, that's a big problem too. A lot of people are very aimless or lost or do act out because they don't feel like they have a place in this world. Mallisters don't have that problem. Lord Jason Mallister would have fought for Hoster Tully and Robert Baratheon on the Trident. 3 of Rhaegar's bannermen were slain by Lord Jason. More on that later. So you'd have these kind of things. These are the kind of things that would be the captured banners, captured axes, swords, bows, just whatever, all over the walls of Seagard. And by the way, if we're looking at it the opposite way, it would be this would be a thing too. And what I mean by that is, the Ironborn are even more about taking things from people and using them, right? Like the Mallister might kill a Greyjoy, but they're not going to wear his helmet. But a Greyjoy might kill a Mallister and show off that he killed a Mallister by wearing an eagle helm and be like, oh, that's the iron price right there. A purple Mallister cloak? That's probably very prized by Ironborn Raiders, because that means you beat someone whose entire purpose is to defeat you. That's an accomplishment if you're Ironborn. You killed some Mallisters. Like we literally see a Ironborn captain under Euron wearing a Lannister breastplate, and everybody's like, "Ooh, look what he did! That's a captain's breastplate." That's in terms of a culture that respects the iron price. That was a high price in iron. You paid for that one, and Mallisters would be the same thing. And you're not killing a Mallister easily. And that's a good segue for our next subtopic, which is Mallister culture. The Mallisters, in part because of geography, are above the rest in the Riverlands when it comes to feuding. Look through a general overview of their history shows very little getting involved in politics and intrigue and taking sides and blood feuds, unless it's against the Ironborn. That's who they focus on, and they try to stay out of everything else, and that's respectable, I gotta say. In terms of Westerosi standards, they fight, but they fight defensively. They're tough, but they're not tough about pushing other people around, right? There's, like I said earlier, there's no Bracken to their Blackwood, no Bolton to their Stark. They're not associated with madness or magic. Yeah, the Ironborn, other cultures have dedicated themselves to fighting the Ironborn, either out of necessity or otherwise, like the Mormonts. But the Mormonts and the Mallisters, they don't have that much in common culturally. Again, skin changing is a big Mormont thing. They have a lot of that going on. Their land, the Bear Island, is so very different than Seagard's territory. Bears versus eagles, oh my, right? And we got First Men origin versus Andal origin. It would be pretty sweet to have a Mallister eagle skin changer, even though I'm down on that possibility. Ironborn would never sneak up on that, let me tell you. Or the eagle on the side of the Mallisters, that kind of thing. Woo. No, that's just not their thing, though, really. Knightly virtues, honor, chivalry, fighting in tourneys, that's their bag. And that does not... Again, it just sounds like the Vale. And let's remind ourselves that Seagard is not far from the Vale. It might be like, wait, really? Yeah, the Vale ends right at the tip of the neck there. There's almost like a 3-point border where the neck and the north and the Vale and the Riverlands kind of all come together there near the Twins. So actually, there is a connection to the Vale in terms of nearby geography. It's not a well-traveled region there, but it is there. Yeah, so other houses that have a little bit in common elsewhere with the Mallisters would be the Shield Islands, right? They're a martial tradition, fighting the Ironborn, knightly. They might be the closest, the most similar to the Mallisters in that regard. the Dornish marches would be another good example. Houses that are very proud. They've fought the Dornish for a long time, and it's a one-way relationship. What I mean by that is the Ironborn raid the Riverlands. The Mallisters don't raid the Ironborn. And the same thing is mostly true for the Dornish marches relationship. Yes, the people of the marches do sometimes attack into Dorne, but it's usually Dornish raiders invading the Stormlands or the Reach, those places really. And because you just don't want to chase the Dornish back into Dorne. You don't want to fight the Dornish in the desert. That's just suicide. Similar reason why you don't try to fight the Ironborn at sea. The Mallisters don't even bother with that. They know it's giving up the advantage. Don't fight them on their terms. So let them come, and then we'll use our defensive advantages when they're foolish enough to fight us. When they come and fight us head on, we'll beat them. If they're gonna avoid us, well, so be it. If they're gonna go attack the Shield Islands, then well, hopefully good luck to you, Shield Islanders. We're focused on our territory only. We're not going elsewhere. So it's defense, permanent defense. There's no end game to this, right? If the Ironborn keep coming, they will keep fighting back. Now, you might think, as I said, using the example of Sir Eustace Osgrey, how they might have been on the verge of not having a purpose anymore, right? 300 years. Aegon the Conqueror ended the old way. They didn't forget. Just like a lot of the Marcher houses haven't forgotten about what Dorne is capable of. They're still proud and warlike and work hard at the business of knighthood, right? And as if to remind them, or us, or Westeros, that just because all that time passed doesn't mean the Ironborn have been civilized. If the Ironborn were gone, that'd be something else. Like, back to Eustace Osgrey, there just isn't a threat of Lannister invasion in the West, or from the West, as there used to be. And the border isn't even where it used to be. And the Osgreys aren't powerful anymore. So even if that border came back, would the Osgreys even be the ones in charge? I don't know. But this has not happened to Seagard. They, even after all the old way being banned, well, what happened 10 years before the Song of Ice and Fire started? Balon Greyjoy's rebellion. Seagard was attacked by the Ironborn. The bell rang. It hadn't rung in 300 years, but they kept that vigilance. Balon probably thought they had gone lax. He's probably like, aha, they haven't fought us in 300 years or so. They're probably slack. Wrong. And that just proves to them, they can remember that. They can say, look, we didn't really have to deal with them for a while, but they still attacked us 300 years later. That proves that we cannot be slack. If that happened, it can happen again. So they have strong evidence that maintaining vigilance is wise. The Freys would argue that the Crannogmen maybe are in that category of raiders who you can't follow back into their own land, but I wouldn't necessarily agree because I feel like the Freys kind of started all that. But I don't know, maybe not. Either way, the Freys want that counted, but I don't count them. So yeah, that's why their pride is maintained for so long. That's why it's a confident sort of pride rather than a toxic pride where they just feel like they deserve it. No, this is earned, as I keep saying and will probably keep saying. They stand for too much. They don't have a lot of scandals. They're good at fighting, and that is the bedrock value of Westerosi society, being stout, immovable, defensive, strong, and virtuous. In a world of Aryan Targaryens, they are the Sir Humphrey Harding of houses. They just quietly kick ass and don't back down. You know, keep your nose clean. If someone brings you into a fight, fight it. But don't be the one to start that fight. And they don't need to talk loudly because their actions speak so loudly. And they look cooler than House Harding, honestly. Purple is a royal color, so is silver. They're upscale. I mean, diamonds are pretty upscale too, but you know, I prefer the eagle sigil. Even their men-at-arms are probably cooler looking than most because it's just a martial culture, right? You want your warriors to be proud. They want to be included. They want to be part of that something, that proud tradition of defense. Standing for something, standing for justice, standing for good, standing against depredation, standing against evil, right? Like, that's the thing to be proud of. So Old Stones. Let's talk about Old Stones. In ancient times, Old Stones ruled over the Riverlands as the Mud Kings. Proximity means a lot amongst the nobility, right? Just being nearby gives you face time with lords. And that's why I bring this up, because when the Muds ruled the Riverlands, the Mallisters were their neighbors. It's not the same as the Mallister, or when the Tullys ruled, the Mallisters aren't neighbors of the Tullys. I mean, they're not super far away, but I mean right next door, the adjacent sub-region there. I bet there were a lot of marriages between Mallister and Muddister. And and they would have a relationship you'd think that would function pretty well, because the Mallisters focus west on defending that border of the kingdom, and the Oldstones, whatever its original name was, we don't know what the name of the castle was, the Muds could focus on administering the Riverlands. They turn their focus east, Mallisters west. Together, that works pretty well. You're right. It's aggressive defense. Offense is not the best defense in their minds. Just hold it to it's like protection, but not the mafia style protection. But they would get reward and acclaim and high status and high standing in this kingdom of the Muds because of their role, which in those days was a lot more important, because the Ironborn were their own kingdom. You know how they were. They would, like, it's their goal to inflict this harm, to do the old way. And the more powerful the foe they defeat, the more proud they are. And that's the Mallisters. That's who they want to knock off the top. So I think that could have been a very powerful relationship, a very good working relationship between the Muds and the Mallisters. One protects the shorelines, the other rules the rest. House Justman, well, that's who came along after the Muds, when the Muds fell after the Christopher, and as we heard from Robb and Catelyn when they were at his sepulcher. There was a 30-year campaign by Benedict Rivers, who was a Westeros's Romeo and Juliet love child, because his mom and dad were a Bracken and Blackwood, and they were he was a bastard. They weren't married. So, but this was a really capable guy. He formed a 300-year dynasty that ruled over the Riverlands. Now, just like under the Muds, the Ironborn are going to keep doing their thing. There's no reason for them to act differently here. They're going to keep raiding the coasts up and down and trying to carve out holdings or conquer more of the mainland, or not, just doing their thing. You know, they're which, depending on which Ironborn king's in charge at that time. Either way, the Mallisters would have to stay focused. So if some sort of internal conflict is happening, not only can they not afford to get involved, not only do they not want to get involved, because these things have a way of snowballing and of moving beyond a single generation. Bracken and Blackwood's the most extreme example, but like, they want to do anything they can to avoid that sort of long-term entanglement. Because what would they have learned after thousands of years of defending against the Ironborn? They would know a lot. They're rather experienced in this. They know when the Ironborn like to attack. They know the types of opportunities that the Ironborn like to seize on. And a very obvious one is civil conflict. If the Riverlands is fighting itself, the Ironborn are like, yes, let's do that. And that's the time when the Mallisters might be most needed to join the civil conflict. That's the time where they have to be strong and firm and say, no. Because if we join this war, the Ironborn will attack. And that's worse than whatever the outcome of this war is probably going to be. So we're going to stay here with most of our soldiers. And you guys know we're not just saying that. You know it's true. Like, it would be an easy excuse to make, and maybe a few Mallister lords have used that excuse when it wasn't really true. But for the most part, it's a fact that if you send your soldiers inland to deal with other things happening, the Ironborn will take note and seize that opportunity and attack. And before you know it, they'll have run off with a bunch of effectively slaves, right? You know, that's not what that's what I'm saying. These men, these defenders of Seagard, have something to be proud of. That's the fate they're saving people from. It isn't just loss of property. And loss of property can be the difference between life and death. Like, what if they burn your fishing boat? That's it. What do you do for a living now? What if they carry off your wife or your daughter, or both? I mean, yeah, these are things that people really need. Really don't want that happening. So, and in fact, this is proven almost, this point about the Mallister saying, no, we're not getting involved. We got to be vigilant here. It was the Ironborn who ended the Justman line after all that. Even after this wariness, it was still the Ironborn who brought it all to an end, a bloody end. A large battle between the two kingdoms, between the Ironborn and the Justman kingdoms, resulted in defeat for King Bernar II, and he had to send his sons, all of them, to Pike as hostages. Yeah, it didn't go well. King Quaredhor murdered them afterwards, and King Bernar launched a hopeless he was just late with his taxes a little bit, and so he just killed all of them. So it was really whoa, that is really heavy-handed. And King Bernard launched a campaign of revenge, which was referred to as hopeless, and indeed it was. But he didn't give up. He couldn't give up. He was just too distraught in grief, and his kingdom went with him. The Mallisters probably saw it coming. They're like, well, this guy is going to attack the Ironborn on their own shores, or attack them when we're undermanned. They would know as well as anyone how hopeless that was, but they're also honor bound to fight till the end. This is what Tywin Lannister predicted in the War of Five Kings, that the Mallisters wouldn't be a big problem because they lack the strength to be a huge issue for the Lannisters on their own, but they wouldn't give up easily because of honor. So Tywin is very good about that, about knowing how each lord is going to react to certain stimuli. One of the few times he was wrong was with Robb Stark, and he was wrong several times. But in general, he knows these lords quite well and is able to predict their actions. Sometimes it's very easy. It's like, well, Lord Frey is not going to join. That guy only joins when he's winning. Easy call. Mallister, it was similar for him. It's like, yeah, Jason Mallister's not going to give up easily, but he's not stupid either. And that was pretty much right. So it was a gruesome end to the Justman Kingdom, and it became gruesome afterwards too, because the Ironborn, without a contiguous solid kingdom and just sort of a bit of anarchy in the Riverlands, that's exactly the state of affairs where the Ironborn most thrive. Now, what happened 100 years later was House Teague made themselves kings of the Riverlands, but like I said, it was still anarchic because they weren't able to have full control, and they were constantly putting down rebellions or fighting to regain this or that. It was never very well held, and that, of course, meant plenty of Ironborn opportunities, as I said. The Mallisters may have just kind of sat back through all that because, again, well, we're defending against the Ironborn, and they're rather active during this time. There was a final battle called the Battle of Six Kings, which was the end of House Teague's pretensions for the kingdom and end of House Teague in general. It was also a moment of opportunity for the Blackwoods to regain the high seat. They lost that too. The Mallisters don't seem to have been involved in any of this, which is a good part of my basis for the continued strategy of them just staying out of things like this. But there was certainly a change regardless. All this anarchy did resolve in the Storm Kings moving in. Yes, House Durrandon were now the overlords of all the Riverlands. At least it wasn't Ironborn. The Mallisters would have really hated that. In fact, they might not have even cared that much that they were ruled from Storm's End rather than Old Stones, or we don't actually know where the Justman Castle was, or the Teagues, anything like that. They're knightly. They've worshipped the Seven. It might not have been such a bad thing. And Seagard is really far from Storm's End. It's the extreme west of the Riverlands, and Storm's End is in the extreme east of the Stormlands. So that might have been a decent situation for them. They might not have been asked for much. The Storm Kings might not have pushed much on them because of the difficulty in bringing them to heel if they were a problem. Also, they would be like, yeah, you guys just keep taking care of those Ironborn. Just keep doing that. We're cool with that. The Stormlands would get it too. I mean, they don't live over there, but they've got their own coasts. The Narrow Sea is full of pirates and slavers. So yeah, they're not they would understand. Even if they don't deal with Ironborn directly, they deal with their ilk. So, now this is something we discussed in the context of our Frey history episode as well, because it was during the reign of the Storm Kings in the Riverlands when the Freys first appeared. And the Freys are important here because as soon as they appeared, they became the closest lordly neighbor to the Mallisters, at least as far as major houses go. So let's go talk about that. The Freys and the Crossing. It's a neighbor of consequences, right? Whereas before the area was kind of loosely governed, lesser nobility, most like we said, it was probably just kind of, sometimes the Mallisters collected taxes from the peasants there. Maybe other people did, but it was just kind of far out there, kind of ungoverned. I don't know. The Freys took over the area, made it into something. Of course, at first it was just two wooden tower houses and a wooden bridge. No big deal. They're not very powerful. At the time, we theorized that maybe the Freys were originally a house from the Stormlands because it was the Storm Kings were ruling the area at the time, and they might want to put one of their own in place. And Seagard might have even liked it because, hey, they put a bridge over that. Maybe they used that bridge. Maybe the Seagard's like, hey, we get more goods coming through. It's easier for us to order supplies, and we're more connected to the rest of the kingdoms this way. That might have been a positive. They might have been very willing to pay the toll quite often. Like, yeah, you guys are doing a good job here. Because again, they're not looking for trouble, and the Freys aren't what the Freys are now. These early Freys, yeah, okay, these guys built a bridge. That's cool, right? What's wrong with that? Maybe as the Freys gained more power, and maybe things became more touchy later as they started to enforce their own borders, and maybe border disputes between Frey and Mallister started to become a thing. I doubt it was ever that bad, because again, even the Freys aren't dumb enough to pick on the Mallisters. Like, who fights a house that's all about fighting? You know, you just don't do that lightly. There's definitely dummies at the top who make that call, but they aren't going to be super common either. The Eagles in shame. Yeah, I said when the Storm Kings ruled the Riverlands, at least it wasn't the Ironborn, but that did happen afterwards, right? After 300 years of Stormland's rule, Harwin Hardhand, King of the Iron Isles, landed his fleet of longships only 40 leagues south of Seagard. I wonder if that was just too big for them to handle, or maybe they had grown slack, or I don't know. I doubt they could have stopped it in any case, because this is a whole fleet. This isn't I don't think Seagard could handle that by themselves. This is a guy who came in force to conquer the whole Riverlands, so that definitely implies a big army. He did win. He pushed out Storm King Arik Durandon. How bad is this? That's why I say this is the Eagles in shame. There's a century of blood, right, that came the year after the Doom. This is a century of shame for the Mallisters. What's worse than being an anti-Ironborn house? Your entire existence is built on that, and you're ruled by the Ironborn. Ugh. Terrible, right? Ugh. And it was a century long. That's why I call it that. So it must have been excessive. The depredations, they probably faced all sorts of insults, mockery. You can just hear the jeering of an Ironborn lord or a group of them above the rest, calling them below the rest as they were drowned. You're drowning a mouse, holding his head underwater as you say below the rest. Yeah, it writes itself, doesn't it? We're told Harwin spent most of his reign putting down rebellions. I mean, go figure. The Riverlands didn't want to be ruled from Pike. And the Mallisters were probably a big part of that, both in the rabble-rousing and in the actual fighting. They were probably watched. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to know that the anti-Ironborn house is probably going to be a problem for you as an Ironborn king. It's almost, maybe it's even a miracle that they survived, that they weren't made extinct. Maybe just because it would have been too much of a problem to do that. It would have been too difficult. And maybe it would have been something they eventually did. Obviously, Harwin, not him, because his descendants didn't do it either. But maybe if Harren the Black hadn't been knocked off the top, maybe if they had been able to establish themselves after Harrenhal, he would have taken a step like that. But nope. And the kings of the Black Line, the Horror Kings, they didn't reestablish the old way. It was kind of a new way, but not that different from what the Mallisters were fighting against. It was still being ruled by the very people they pledged to defeat. Their entire existence is about. So it's like a permanent state of defeat and shame. It also did mean an end to their purpose, right? The Sir Eustace Osgrey example comes back once again. Who are you supposed to fight against when you have no enemy anymore? It's worse when your enemy has won and rules you, though. Then they're legally allowed to do the things they're doing to you. Yeah, legally in quotes, right? So, can't go too far with that because, well, the Ironborn, they rule you, so there is something to fight, right? They're not gone. Your purpose, in fact, maybe is even higher now. Not just defending against them, it's getting them out. You lost. Time to make good on that. Time to reverse that situation. A real tough timeline for them to stomach. A real test of their virtues. It's good that they made it out okay from all that. I bet it's literally the worst century in Mallister history. You know, like there might be a special section of their records where like these books are locked down. You know, they don't necessarily want a lot of people reading that stuff. But when the chance came to end it all, when there was finally a real movement towards overthrowing the Black Line, they were very ready to help. Eagles under the dragons. The Mallisters rose with the Tullys to fight against Harren. They were second after the Blackwoods in terms of the role of houses mentioned that were ready to help. Of course, they were very ready to help. Now, it's just the order that they're listed doesn't necessarily mean anything, but they're mentioned prominently. I doubt anyone even had to ask. It's like, yeah, the Mallisters are going to help us for sure. We don't even have to send a message. Just tell them we're about to go to war with the Ironborn, and they'll be ready. And Harren was deeply unpopular despite that. Like, he could have been from the Riverlands, and everybody would have hated him anyway. But it was worse because he was an Ironborn, worshiping the drowned god. So Aegon the Conqueror shows up, burns Harrenhal. Like I said, the Tullys and the Mallisters and all the others joined quickly. And then Aegon went to the Iron Isles as well, brought Balerion with him, showed them what they were up against, made a demonstration, burned a few things, said, hey, you guys want to cause problems? Well, you're going to have to deal with this, and you can't deal with this. Despite the Ironborn penchant for self-ruin, they were not foolish about this. They saw Balerion and were like, yeah, even we aren't stupid enough to go up against that. So the old way didn't die. It just became more exclusive. It became harder. Right? Because to reave and raid and loot and gain glory, you could still do that. You just couldn't do it in Westeros anymore. You had to sail all the way to the Stepstones or to Sothorios or the Basilisk Isles or even farther. That's harder to do. The journey alone might kill you. So it takes a braver, bolder Ironborn, and the ones who do that and succeed are all the harder to kill, all the more difficult, all the more experienced. And while that's happening, while this new class of exclusive, more elite Ironborn are out there making themselves great at fighting, Seagard, they're training, they're maintaining their vigilance, but they're not actually fighting real opponents. So it's like, that's probably made some lords of Seagard a little nervous. It's like, our guys aren't being tested, other than the things we can do with training here. Whereas their Ironborn raiders are going out there and fighting all over the world and gaining acclaim and confidence, and I don't like that. They're more seasoned than we are. It's not a good state of affairs there, even though the Ironborn were held in check by the dragons. Mallister is looking back, but like, well, this is thousands of years we had to fight the Ironborn. Is this really the end of that? Is it really gone forever? Are we really not going to see them as a problem? And of course, they're not going to think that way. They're like, nah. As long as the Ironborn still exist, they could attack. And that's the right attitude. That is the way the Ironborn think. So, and really, how can they count on the dragons? When Dagon Greyjoy came around, no. The dragons were dead by then, but the Targaryens didn't even do anything at first. So there'd be a lot of reasons to think, yeah, this new king on the Iron Throne, are they really going to come to our aid if the Ironborn do their thing? I don't think they believed that. I think they're like, no, we're going to have to continue to do what we do. We can't count on the Iron Throne. Who knows about these Targaryens? Like, what? Maegor the Cruel, when he became king, did they really count on that? We're like, yeah, we can count on him. Aenys? Maybe even less, right? I don't know. Jaehaerys, maybe. Yeah, that one they might have felt comfortable with. In fact, there's a Mallister on record as complimenting Jaehaerys. It's like, this guy is going to be a good king. But other than that, I don't know. Like, a lot of just, no, we're on our own here, and we can't rely on other people. That's how they've always been. That's how they're going to keep it. So tradition carries forward. And as much as we talked about civil conflict within Westeros, or within the Riverlands being a reason for the Mallisters to say, actually, this is the time that we most need to not get involved, because, again, when everyone's fighting, the Ironborn take their shot. That's just as true when you're looking at Westeros as a whole. It doesn't have to be just the Riverlands. So whenever the Iron Throne has civil conflict, the Mallisters have a tough decision. Eagles can dance too. A certain Lord Lyman Mallister defeated Criston Cole in the same tourney where Criston beat Daemon in that famous Maidenpool melee. So quite a win for Lord Lyman here. And of course, war came to the Riverlands during the dance, as it so often does. It's the heart of the heart of the Westeros. The Riverlands is the center. The Mallisters are, as usual, somewhat drawn in, but because they're not in the center of the center, they're off on the west coast there. They can sort of stay out of it. They can limited engagement. They did rise for Rhaenyra. They were blacks. And of course, who would have been less surprised than them that the Red Kraken took his chance during the Dance of the Dragons? They'd be like, oh yeah, obviously that happened. Yeah. But what could they do about it? He wasn't attacking them. He attacked the West. He attacked the Lannisters. So they're like, all right, well, good luck, y'all. We don't want you to lose, but you're our enemy in the dance. So we kind of do want you to lose. Maybe just you guys hurt each other. Maybe no one wins and you both just lose. Yeah. So a certain Lord Jorah Mallister brought his men probably not all of them, given what we keep talking about, to the Riverlands, the center where they fought in the final battle of the dance, the Muddy Mess, aka the Battle of the King's Road. That's where Lord Boros Baratheon led his men bravely, despite the odds against them, despite his forcibly conscripted Crownlands host turning on him from behind. He didn't give up. He decided to go down fighting. And before he died, he took on Lord Jorah Mallister and won. Unfortunately for Lord Jorah Mallister, he was slain by Lord Boros. Lord Boros also killed Lord Darry and a bunch of other knights. Probably some Mallister men were among those other knights. I doubt just the Lord of Seagard falls and no other men of Seagard try to do anything about it. You know, they would want to get an answer. They would want to get Lord Boros for doing that, or at least kill some other Baratheons. So not a lot of detail there, but it would have been, it was a muddy mess. Lord Kermit Tully avenged them both in the end, right? He's the one who actually killed Lord Boros. And I guess he would have attended the funerals of both Lord Darry and Lord Mallister there, which we'll see the reverse of that, because Lord Jason is one of the 7 chosen at Hoster Tuller's funeral. And speaking of, I wonder what Mallister funeral customs are like. Maybe they're buried up on the Cape of Eagles, somewhere up high above the rest, right? That would make sense. A sky burial of sorts.
They get, a flock of eagles to pick the body up and fly it to the highest peak. It's really something to see.
I pictured a flock of seagulls when you said that, like with those outfits like the band. A bunch of dudes dressed up like that carry off the Lord. Yes, it's very upscale, very very noble. Not that it has anything to do with the Mallisters, but the one last note about the Dance of the Dragons. The aerial acrobatics of Tessarion and Seasmoke are described like the flight of eagles, whereas when the larger dragons like Vagar are fighting in the air, it's nothing like that. They're not nearly as maneuverable. They're like big, turn slowly. The Last Reaver. During the reign of King Aerys I, on the heels of the Great Spring Sickness and the drought, and of course, let's not forget the continuing lack of dragons in this era, the Ironborn had another opening. A particularly large opening because of all the above that I just listed, and the king was kind of lax in Aerys I. He was very bookish. And because the Lord Reaper at the time was this guy, Dagon Greyjoy, who was very capable, very smart. We have Bloodraven as Hand of the King, who's a lot more concerned with the East, what Bittersteel is doing. And so this problem got left undealt with. Now, Seagard defends its own shores. It doesn't, as we said, they're too busy with that to go defending other people's shores. It strikes me that not all the Lords of Pike are dumb enough to just go, hey, let's fight Seagard. Let's go fight the people that are designed to fight us. Like, that's their whole purpose of existing. And fight them on their terms. Like, that's suicidal. That said, it's what a lot of Lords of Pike have done. We've got a great example coming later. Still, Dagon was actually successful for a long time. So given his success, I have to think that he probably wasn't doing the dumb things that Ironborn do sometimes and how they pick their targets. So he may have been smart by just avoiding Seagard altogether, just picking on the Lannisters, maybe the Reach. In fact, we're told that the Direwolf and Lion's tails were tied in knots. So he also was a menace to the Starks. We know that for sure because at least one Lord Stark died fighting them. That's Baron. So this would have been a thing the Mallisters were at least concerned with, if not something they were actively trying to work on. Maybe they were among those petitioning the throne to take a greater interest in this. A Mallister representative, the Lord of Seagard, might go all the way to the Red Keep to be like, hey, Bloodraven, we'll do the dirty work. Just send us some extra ships and men. We'll lead the assault or whatever needs to be done. But this Dagon has got to be stopped. Now, we're not sure how Dagon was actually stopped. This is something George has kept close to the chest. We believe that Maekar likely had something to do with it, but the Mallisters very likely did too. Like, if you're going to go fight the Ironborn near their own territory, doesn't it make like a 1,000% chance to involve the house that would be just champing and chomping at the bit to get out, like the bit, whatever bit an eagle wears, they're chewing through that thing ready. I mean, that's why Seagard exists, to fight against men like Dagon Greyjoy. So I think it's likely to assume they were involved, and if Maekar didn't include them, then you're silly, Maekar. What you doing? Now, here's an example from the other side of the coin, however. As much as Dagon Greyjoy was a huge menace, a foe to all who were not Ironborn, we have a tragic friendship that we're not sure when this happened. It definitely happened during the Iron Throne era. It's not pre-Aegon's conquest, because it's Lord Loron Greyjoy, called Loron the Bard. Not your typical Lord Greyjoy, the Bard. Yeah, I mean, they do like their reaving songs, but it's not usually like the Lord who's the guy making the songs, right? It's some skald or poet or whatever. And I know they don't use the term skald, but it's the equivalent, right? But we know that they love reaving songs. Like, what's his face? Cleftjaw is a big fan, for example. But he was friends, and I put, this section is a tragic ... friendship, because there's maybe some implications here beyond friendship. Loren Greyjoy the Bard, friends with Sir Desmond Mallister. Huh. Now, earlier I mentioned the Romeo and Juliet aspect of Benedict Justman's parentage. This sounds similar, possibly including the romantic part. Obviously, it's not a Romeo and Juliet. I mean, more like Romeo and Romeo. But great friends, when it's in a historical context, written by academics, is often code for a romantic relationship. George knows this. That said, it is not a guarantee. That doesn't mean they were lovers. It's just on the table is a strong possibility. And part of the reason I think this way is, besides these clues, is the subtext is, would it really be tragic if they were friends? I mean, it might be a problem. It might cause friction, but tragic? I mean, maybe. If they had to fight each other, I could see it.
You can be a friendship that is thrust against each other, just like it could be family, you know?
Yeah. But why would, if he's the Lord, why would he have to attack? You know what I mean?
I think it's just more fun. It's more interesting. It's more meaningful for them to have been lovers.
It's different, yeah.
But it's still like two friends thrust apart from each other is certainly tragic and meaningful.
Yeah, and exactly what we might be faced with when it comes to Theon and Patrick Mallister. Theon and Patrick Mallister are buddies. There's no romantic relationship there. They're not banging. In fact, they go off and sleep with women together.
So they're not banging yet.
Yeah, so maybe they would have got, they're like, why do we need a woman? Why don't we just, we don't need a third. Let's just see what's up here. Yeah, so definitely it doesn't have to be that. Like, there's definitely other things on the table here. But yeah, if they were more than friends, if they did have a romantic relationship, what they should have done is the Carl the Maid plan. Carl the Maid suggested to Asha, like, screw this Westeros. Our relationship is a problem for other people. Let's just leave. Let's go to Essos. We can go over there where our relationship would be accepted, if not tolerated at the very least, And these are people with means. Like, we got Sir Desmond Mallister and Lord Loren Greyjoy. These guys aren't broke. I guess it just wasn't meant to be. But maybe one day we'll hear what the real tragedy behind that was. Pretty compelling idea. If you are someone who is wanting to participate in supporting our show, there's a lot of ways to do that. If you listen to a lot of our episodes, want to give back a little way, there's a few ways to do that without actually spending any additional money. That's one of the best ways. Synergy between everything. Go to our website, historyofwesteros.com. Any of these Amazon links on the right there, you can, whether you buy the actual product that's linked or just get something else, we get credit and it doesn't cost you anything more. And there's lots of great things to buy. And we're always putting things up there that we think are kind of cool. Books, like calendars, things associated with Song of Ice and Fire that we think are fun. But like I said, once you click through, anything you order through that link is going to count. So it's a pretty good way to give us a little extra to show your support for History of Westeros without spending any additional money. But if you do want to go a little further, well, that's what we have Patreon for. And again, you get something in exchange for your support, no matter what level you join us at. And if you go to the website, you'll see a bunch of different options with different benefits. You'll absolutely, at the very least, get our bonus episodes. That's concluded with even the lowest level of sponsorship, of membership. And we've got a pretty good number of bonus episodes. Plus, you get to do things like vote and get access to our scripts and notes, maybe get a cool nickname, things like that. But most importantly, you're supporting something that you are participating in, right? That's how I do it. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and the ones that I realize I listen to the most, top 5, top 10, I give them some money. Seems like that's the way it should be. I think it's a good system. HistoryofWesteros.com, that's where it's at. Dornish Dame says, lots of transferable skills defending Seagard to defending the wall. Yes, absolutely. Maybe part of why Dennis joined. Also, yes, I agree completely. Equating the Ironborn with wildlings would definitely contribute to how Dennis sees Cotter Pike. Also, yes, and by the way, I agree with calling them wildlings when they're raiders trying to steal. That's where I've landed. If we're just talking about them as a whole, they're the free folk. But if we're talking about them in the context of stealing people, then they're wildlings because they're raiders. And I'm not going to be nice about that group, of that subset of them, because those are the bad ones. Anyway, even if some of them are decent folk besides that. But that behavior, not good. Real quick, the name Jason. It's worth a very quick discussion. George prefers to, one letter switch, right? It's often how he tweaks a name. But some of them he doesn't tweak at all. Jason. There's several Jasons. Joanna Lannister's father, Jason, and the Lord of Casterly Rock during part of the dance. And, Joanna is another example. That name is spelled the same way as it's spelled in the real world. Obviously, there's other examples like Joffrey instead of Jeffrey. I guess Joffrey kind of is a real name too, but maybe that's not the best example. But it is an example of one that's slightly different.
I think having him named Jason and there being Lannisters named Jason also emphasizes the pride and arrogance and status of the Mallisters.
The names are Lannister and Mallister, very similar names.
Jason is a proud and a strong name,
Yeah, absolutely. In our Greek Game of Thrones series, there's a very important character named Jason of Pherae for the straight guy, as I call him. And Pherae is in Thessaly. And he's named after Jason of Argonauts fame, who was also from Thessaly. All right. A minute on actual eagles here. They are hardcore. Real eagles are really hardcore, man. A lot of species of eagle just lay one egg, but some of them lay multiple eggs, and what happens is the larger chick just kills the other one, and the parents watch it. They just let it happen. Like, yep, well, that's how it's got to be. We only got room for one. Ooh. Also, eagles are the only species that has no fear of other avian predators, and the way biologists and avian specialists, avianists, I don't know, have noticed this is via, even the birds of prey that strike, they do their attack, they plummet, fall real fast, hit their target. Even birds that do that look behind them. They make sure no one's coming. They look back. They're like, anyone coming to get me as I'm doing this? Is someone striking me as I'm striking them? It's like an instinct. Eagles don't do that. They're just so not worried about it. It's like, no one's going to do that. We're the biggest. No bird of prey attacks us. We are the alpha. We are above the rest. Danny would like that. Eagles don't look back. They might if dragons were around. If dragons is a world with dragons, they might be like, okay, there is something out there that's a problem. Yeah. Apart from that, eagles are rather important in Jon's story, right? Jon's versus Orell, and Orell hating Jon even after he's dead and all that. Yeah. Eagles are also associated with sphinxes. In the story of A Song of Ice and Fire and in real life, eagles' wings are what tends to be the wings on a sphinx, rather than, even in Westeros, right? You would think it might be dragon's wings, but no, it's eagle's wings. Mm-hmm. Which might mean, for real, that Valyrian blood mages included eagles in their experimentation with hybrid species, right? I mean, if you can combine wyverns, and fireworms to make dragons, well, if you're combining dragons and lions and eagles to make sphinxes or what have you, if you've done the first, the second doesn't seem like a stretch anymore.
Of course, it being eagle wings also points to eagles proliferating somewhat in Essos, right? Like it does.
That's true, and that tracks with the real world. Eagles are, like I said, eagles are very kind of a generic term that is sometimes misused. It doesn't matter. We're not getting that deep into it, but it's misused in part because there's so many species that get thrown into the eagle category because there's so many around the world. And arguably bald eagles, the symbol of America, aren't actually eagles. Some people consider them not true eagles, but we're not getting into that. Maybe the Mallisters would get into that sort of thing. What is and isn't a true eagle? But we don't have time for that. Let's instead delve into the Chronicles of A Song of Ice and Fire as they pertain to House Mallister in order to set up what we think is coming. First, a character who straddles the line between history and A Song of Ice and Fire relevance, Joffrey Mallister. Does that name ring a bell to y'all? You're like, wait, who's Joffrey Mallister? That was one of Brandon Stark's companions who rode to the Red Keep, demanding demanding Rhaegar come out and die, actually, only to be executed. So this Joffrey might have been Patrick's older brother. Nina and I talked it out. We think it's more likely Jason's younger brother than Patrick's older brother. And this Joffrey may have been heir at the time. It may have been before Patrick was born, before Jason had any children. And that tracks with who Brandon's companions were. They were mostly heirs. Like, he was the heir. Elbert Aaron was the heir to the Eyrie, right? So, yeah, that was just kind of his gang there. So this would have been around 282 when Joffrey Mallister was killed by the Mad King. And of course, the Robert's Rebellion broke out shortly afterwards. This is a house that might not have easily risen against House Targaryen, right? Because, well, they stay out of things, as we said. They still probably would have because their liege lord did. And that is even more of a consideration. And in these times, maybe there's less worry about the Ironborn. I don't know if they would have actually made that decision because Balon had tried to rebel 10 years prior. And guess what? He did it again. Well, no, actually, back up. Balon hadn't rebelled yet. This is Robert's Rebellion. He would be rebelling in about 8 years. I'm sure the Mallisters were still even wary at that point. And of course, he tries again during A Song of Ice and Fire. Anyway, all that aside, it doesn't matter what the Mallisters would have done without this provocation. There was this provocation. A Mallister was murdered. That is not your normal, hey, we can stay out of it type situation. Not to mention Brandon was murdered too, like his friend, they were buddies. Like, this is a big provocation. And the Mallisters were probably among those who believed, like Brandon did, that Rhaegar kidnapped Lyanna rather than an elopement. So this is multiple infractions by the Iron Throne against them and their closest friends and allies. So there's really not much question that they're going to get involved, even with their attitude of trying to hang back when possible or when it's prudent. Lord Jason himself. All right, let's focus on him a bit. He's been quite a part of the episode, but let's take a little microscope here and take a look. He became Lord somewhere around the year 278, roughly around the Defiance of Duskendale, just after that. He was at the double wedding of Catelyn and Lysa just before the war broke out, when all the arrangements were being made for who the allies would be. Catelyn remembers lavish gifts from the Mallisters, from Jason specifically. She also remembers Jason, joking with Blackfish, which, should we consider Seagard as a possible place for Blackfish to go seek refuge? More on that in a bit. And the answer, in my mind, is absolutely possible, yes. But going back to this timeline, right around the rebellion, Robert's Rebellion, how deeply was he connected to the Great Northern Conspiracy, if such a thing happened, or whatever you want to call it, whatever, there was some kind of conspiracy. We don't know exactly what it involved or what the plans were, but we do know that there was an alliance of North and Riverlands and other lords that were concerned about what was going on in the Iron Throne. So I imagine they were pretty confident in his help and his being solid and being who he is. But I don't know how deeply he was involved in any planning or plotting. It was more like a guy like, yeah, when things break out, we can count on him, but let's not bring him into the cellar to discuss the plot, because maybe that's not his bag. So Catelyn notices how proud and fearless and strong he looks and remembers that he is quite accomplished in battle. Imagine when he was in his prime, which is around this time, during the Robert's Rebellion. He already had tournament wins to his name and a bunch of deep runs. Like, he lost to Barristan really deep in a tournament once. He lost to Jorah at Lannisport, the one that Jorah won, the really famous one Jorah won when he, quote unquote, won Lyness Hightower alongside his wreath. Yeah, Jason was one of the people he beat there, and that was a notable name amongst the notable names he defeated. It was like, he beat Lord Jason Mallister. That's a big one. He beat a lot of big names, that being one of them. So Septa Mordane tells Sansa that Lord Jason killed 3 of Rhaegar's bannermen on the Trident, which implies that the Battle of the Trident, he killed 3 different, well, bannerman is kind of a loose term. Like, does he mean the lord of a certain crown of Crownlands houses, lords of the Narrow Sea? Houses that were sworn to Dragonstone, or just knights that were in Rhaegar's service? It's because the term is, like I said, it gets used a little. Either way, though, that is badass. And he's going to cut a striking figure on the battlefield with his eagle-winged helm and his purple and silver, cutting down whoever's in his way. This is a dangerous dude. Nothing speaks like skill, and he's clearly that. Honestly, I'll be a little disappointed if we don't get to see him in action. You know, this is a guy. He's ever since the early parts of the first book, it's like this guy's a secret badass. This guy is accomplished. He's just waiting to unleash his sword on somebody. You know, will he fight against one of the other claimants? Will he fight Lannisters? Will he fight Ironborn? Maybe he'll go north. Maybe he'll fight at Winterfell. That's not the kind of character that would have been included in the TV version of this, but why do we care about that? It doesn't tell us anything about the book. Not this, anyway. Other plot lines, maybe. Not this. Definitely not. Mallisters were pretty much not on the TV show at all. So, I think that's an entirely possible outcome, that he will go north, either to go to the Wall or to Winterfell to help fight the worst invaders of all, right? One of the few things that's worse than Ironborn is the undead. But we're still not there yet. Before current times, there was another major event that Seagard would have been very involved with, which is Balon's rebellion. Now, earlier I said, hey, a lot of Lords of Pike are smart enough to just not fight the Mallisters. Why do that? You can gain glory and loot and acclaim and the Iron Price by fighting the Lannisters, or just people who aren't literally dedicated to fighting you, you know? But we also pointed out that some Lords of Pike really did want to do that. They must really hate the Mallisters. They want to prove that the Mallisters are weak. They want to strike at them and say, hey, look, if we can kill the Mallisters, we can defeat the Mallisters, everyone's going to be afraid of us because the house that is designed to beat us couldn't beat us. Everyone's going to be afraid of us. I think that may be what Balon was thinking, because he did go right at Seagard. Well, he sent his son right at Seagard. Kind of aiming to do what Aegon the Conqueror did, like a reverse, beat up the biggest guy in prison as soon as you get there kind of thing. Aegon didn't pick off the smaller kingdoms. He went right at Harren, the big one. Partly because he was also hated and he knew people would join him to do it, which is not the case for Balon. Balon is not going to get help. But Balon did think that others wouldn't get help. His plan was, hey, I don't think Robert has a lockdown on this country yet, so here's my opportunity. He was wrong, but you can kind of get the thinking, because it's the kind of things Ironborn look for. That's the kind of opportunity they're looking for. He was a little ahead of himself on that. So Balon was banking on that, and he burned the iron-fleeted anchor. That was Euron's idea, and then he immediately sent his heir, Rodrik Greyjoy, with a fleet to attack Seagard. And they tried to storm Seagard, and they got part of the way in. I think that their initial efforts were a success. They got inside the castle, so it had a chance of succeeding, maybe. The bell rang. That was the one time that the bell had rang in 300 years. Lord Jason reminded Patrick not to get too close to Theon. Remember, we talked about that. And this is that moment. This is then Theon and Patrick discussing it afterwards about why, hey, son, Mallister, Greyjoy, this isn't a good look for us. You being friends with him, I don't know about that, man. And here's Patrick and Theon discussing what Lord Jason said to him.
Never mind that the bell has been rung just once in 300 years, Patrick had told Theon the day after, as he shared his father's cautions in a jug of green apple wine. Green apple wine, yeah, right, I love that. When my brother stormed Seagard, Theon said, Lord Jason had slain Rodrik Greyjoy under the walls of the castle and thrown the Iron Men back into the bay. If your father supposes I bear him some enmity for that, it's only because he never knew Rodrik. So I guess I said it slightly wrong there. He didn't actually get into the castle. He slew him under the walls of the castle. So, yeah, they didn't quite get that far, and which reminds us of my original point, which this was kind of dumb. It was bold. I mean, if it had worked, it really would have sent a message, but I don't think it had a very good chance of succeeding. It doesn't look like it did. Jason killed Rodrik personally. Again, nice. Like, well done. Like, that's his job. It's what the Mallisters are supposed to do. He took the lead. He killed their leader, and that seemed to end it. Like, as soon as Rodrik was killed, the attack stopped. Apparently, they fled back to their ships and back to Pike. And with the bad news for Lord Balon. Sorry, bro.
Sorry, Lord Greyjoy. I mean, King, if that's what you want to call yourself. It's not going so well. But it feels like he was getting ahead of himself. Why not gain elsewhere, destroy things that are easy, and then take on Seagard? I think he just had he was thinking of the reward and not the difficulty, which is Balon's method, right? What was Balon's long-term plan for capturing the North? How was he going to hold that? Wasn't a very good plan, was it? Asha had the right of it. We're not going to hold on to that. We're never going to keep the North. It's too bloody full of Northmen, she said. Correct. You might have it for a while, but you're not going to hold it. So, yeah. So this is Balon. This is right in line with how he thinks. He goes for it all and bites off more than he can chew. And part of why I think it's such a bad idea, too, is because Seagard wasn't a threat to his independence. He could strike at Lannisport, strike at other places. Seagard's not going to attack him. Seagard's only going to defend against him. So he could have just ignored them for a while or entirely. But again, that's why they say Balon is mad, Euron is madder. There's some of that evidence that Balon was mad. Yeah, a true believer in the old way, like crush the enemies of the old way, So, I think some people probably on his side probably appreciated that sentiment, but just, again, too much. He aimed high, but you can't aim that high when someone who's above the rest. They're too high, just too high. And again, repeating an earlier point, he probably thought they had grown lax since the bell hadn't rang in almost 300 years. But he was wrong. It was a misread. Lord Jason was personally very ready, among other things. What a legendary moment, really. Like I told you earlier about what kind of stories they would write down, kind of what the archives and the annals of Mallisters would have. That one got added. For sure. Lord Jason killing Rodrik. That is a classic legendary moment. That is one that's gone down for all time. So the glory that Balon intended for himself and his son, he gave it to Lord Jason. That's not what he wanted, but that's what happened. Yep. And that was the end, effectively, of the rebellion. Once it started going bad, it went bad, and Balon was too stubborn to give up. So Meron died in the collapse of the walls. That was Theon's other brother. And Balon should have probably bent the knee before that. We know that Robert got things together and they invaded Pike. We don't hear about the Mallisters there, but I would be extremely surprised if they weren't part of the invasion. Yeah, maybe Jorah got through the wall first and then Thoros of Myr, but I bet some Mallisters were right there too. While it's true the entire purpose of Seagard is to fight Ironborn, it's not just the whole idea of Patrick and Theon being friends. It's kind of unseemly, right? Like in terms of noble society, but also like if you're aiming high. Talk about aiming high. Lord Balon was aiming for the ultimate victory there. The best thing that could ever happen for the world of Westeros would be that if there really is long-term peace between the Ironborn and the Mallisters some of them could rub off on the Ironborn, maybe not the other way around so much, but making them a more civilized people. And that could start with something like this, a friendship between the two lords or the two powerful nobles of the two most powerful houses there. Yeah, a military win over Seagard would be big, but if we're looking ahead to a truly positive future, that's the kind of thing you'd want. The rewards of peace, the things that Asha talked about. Like this isn't something that's completely out of nowhere. People in Westeros have looked at this possibility. It might seem pretty unrealistic, but it isn't so unrealistic that it is out of mind. Because like I said, Asha brought this up. She's like, yeah, the rewards of peace, the rewards of friendship with the Northerners. She's talking about the Northerners, but concept is the same. Friendship with the Riverlanders is not that different. The point is working together, benefiting, everybody, your sons grow up and get to marry and have good lives, that kind of thing. And your daughters get to have good husbands and are protected and they get to have good lives too, etc. This is what Asha was pushing. Obviously, the Ironborn weren't moved by that. But plenty of people would have been. Plenty of non-Ironborn would have been like, yeah, that sounds great. And they would have hoped the Ironborn go in that direction. But you can also understand why Lord Jason would be very pessimistic about that possibility. Be like, bro, it's been like this thousands of years. You really think it's going to change now? Is it really that? Is this moment in time really that big of a change? The Ironborn are still right there. There's just as many of them. They still got their ships. Yeah, they got this weird Euron guy, but when Euron's gone, they're just going to be who they are again. He's certainly not leading them in a positive direction. So yeah, I guess I hate to say it, but I think I'm with Lord Jason here. I just don't think that Theon is not the guy to reform the Ironborn, and Patrick isn't necessarily the Mallister that's going to stand tall on that either. These guys are, they're Theon and Patrick. They hang out, they drink, and they go off chasing women. That's not really who you look to for reform, I don't think. Theon's different now. A lot has happened to him since his hanging outs with Patrick, but yeah. Honestly, we talked earlier about Desmond and Lord Loran, the Bard. The Mallister might be the person who doesn't belong in the equation if we're looking for a parallel. It might be Theon's friendship with Robb that was the tragedy there. You know, like that was kind of a tragedy in a way.
Yeah,
more for Robb, but also for Theon. Theon feels extremely guilty about what he did. And he's suffering in more ways than guilt, too. Theon and Patrick as well take us into the War of Five Kings, because this is when they were riding together. They were fighting together at this point, and that makes for some interesting points here. The Whispering Wood and the Battle of the Camps. After Robb splits his army at the Twins, sends his infantry east towards the Green Fork, and dashes hard south with his cavalry to break the siege of Riverrun, Lord Jason joins. Jason wasn't at the Twins. He rides south to join them as they're heading in that direction. And he has an immediate impact. During the Whispering Wood, he captures Lord Gawain Westerling. Yeah. Robb's wife's dad. He captured Lord Gawain. And Patrick Mallister is one of Robb's personal guard at the Whispering Wood. Now, how perfect is that? Or the house that's known for defense, for guarding people? Of course, Patrick belongs in Robb's personal guard. That's where a Mallister belongs, right? I'm not sure where he was when Torren and Eddard Karstark was slain by Jaime Lannister, and the Hornwood kid too. Not Hallease, that's the dad. I forget. Darren Hornwood was killed there too. Theon was there too, and he didn't. He said, "I almost crossed swords with the Kingslayer." Patrick, I guess he could have said the same thing. I almost crossed swords. You almost died then. Because Patrick doesn't really, I don't know, he doesn't really come off as anything special warrior-wise. Maybe he's better than he seems, and he was given this position. But I don't know, he just maybe seems like he's not quite his father. And that's something to think about. Maybe Jason dies, and if Patrick becomes Lord Mallister, that could send them in a whole different direction, whole different trajectory. But again, younger man, probably only like 17 or 18, Theon's age, only a little bit older than Robb, who was 16. So the fact that he's not a knight, don't read too much into that. Although Sir Dennis Mallister was a knight by 18, so Now, Jason also fights in the Battle of the Camps as well. It's a night attack, and they attacked and caused great chaos. No word if Lord Jason rode through that Lannister camp making eagle sounds, because that would have been pretty cool. Like, cutting people down, yelling like an eagle, like a madman. Doesn't really seem like something he would do, but I picture it anyway. Let's talk about the Kingdom of the North and how the Mallisters fit into that. After the initial battles and the initial success, Lord Jason joined Robb's war council. Seemed like it was a foregone conclusion that he would belong there. Like, of course, this guy belongs on the... there's no question of his ability or of his seniority. He had little hesitation. He was one of the first people to say, yeah, crown Robb. He immediately called for a defensive posture, as a Mallister would, right? He's like, all right, let's fortify the Riverlands, deny Tywin supplies, and make things difficult for him that way, rather than direct confrontation, But that's not what they did, but fits that Lord Jason would say that. When it was time to send an envoy to Balon Greyjoy, Cat was like, send Jason. And nah, Robb sent Theon. Mistake. It would have been pretty interesting if that's who showed up. It's like, yeah, the Mallister showed up to talk to you. Balon's like, I don't want to talk to him. Yeah. So Theon actually went to Seagard with Lord Jason to take ship to go to Seagard, to go to Pike, which is part of why Lord Jason wasn't there for some important things. At the Battle of the Fords, Lord Jason is back by then, and he is the commander of defending of four of the fords, and drives back all the attacks, kills Lord Flemont Brax in the process, although arguably Flemont killed himself by getting on a crappy raft in full armor and drowning. Yeah. He gets half credit for his own death there. Next up, we have Lord Jason as one of the pallbearers, meaning he was one of the 7 lords chosen to give Lord Hoster his Tully River funeral send-off. great honor for a Lord of the Riverlands, and it seems, again, like a lot of other things, like, of course, Jason's included in this. There's just not a lot of other lords of the Riverlands that could... There aren't 12 lords in the Riverlands that are more outstanding than him, that have more seniority or pride or whatever, or standing. They were former kings, too. So, yeah, and let alone, 7. So he would have been subordinate to Lord Hoster for a long time. Hoster was lord of Riverrun before Jason was lord of Seagard. So yeah, this guy would have been kind of the guy, his liege lord during his father's time, maybe even his grandfather's time. This is a big change at the top. He would not have shown any, because he's a proud and honorable guy. He wouldn't have smirked or frowned or grimaced when Edmure kept missing with his shots. He would have probably kept a stone face, but he would have felt the shame probably. Yeah. The witness. Lord Jason is at Seagard when the Miraham returns from the Iron Isles with news of Balon's death. So in Clash of Kings, Theon takes the Miraham from Seagard to Pike, and then months pass. Balon dies. And in the chaos of Balon's death, the Miraham escapes back to Seagard, brings news to Jason. Jason immediately brings the captain to Hag's Mire, where Robb's army is, where Robb signs his will. Jason's one of the witnesses. Not only is he one of the witnesses, but he's part of the plan. The plan to deal with the Ironborn in the north, which of course you're going to include Jason in that. So his plan was to send 2 long ships into the neck, flying Robb's banner so that the Crannogmen would know who they are, and Howland Reed would know, hey, allies, and would, flag them down. One of those boats would have Lady Mage, the other would have Lord Glover, Galbert Glover, and the ships are Jason's. It's Jason's long ships that are doing this. And the plan was also for, after the Red Wedding, was for Catelyn to spend the rest of the war at Seagard, where she would be safe. Catelyn did not like that idea. Jason was very polite about it, but Catelyn's like, you're just sending me away to be out of the way and not be a part of things. To be fair, Catelyn had just, set Jaime free, and people weren't exactly happy with her decision-making at that point, so that was part of it. But of course, none of that ended up happening, and that's why Jason was not at the Red Wedding, because he had to go to Seagard to carry out those orders with the long ships. He had to launch those ships, give the commands in Robb's name, and do all that. So it kind of worked out for him. But Patrick still went to the Red Wedding. But by the time of the Red Wedding, since Theon's not around anymore, who's Patrick's new drinking buddy? Edmure Tully. That makes a little more sense. You got the heir to Riverrun, or now the current Lord of Riverrun. The funeral's already happened with the next Lord of Seagard. Yeah, that makes a little more seemly of a relationship than with Theon Greyjoy. And again, it's the same type of friendship, though. Edmure is a known purveyor of sex workers, and of course Theon and Patrick would do similar things. They would go out and drink and find women together. Yeah, maybe that kind of thing. So on the night of the Red Wedding, he wasn't drinking because he's one of the guards, right? But that hardly mattered. I mean, the enemy was too well prepared for some not drinking to make a whole lot of difference. In fact, it backfired in terms of the Greatjon. His drinking made him harder to deal with. But like Greatjon, Patrick was on the short list of men they had no intention of killing, because they didn't want Lord Jason to be fully unrestrained in coming after them. With Patrick as a hostage, then Jason's got to sit out and go, I can't, they're going to kill my son. I want to help. And of course the Freys knew that. Even an honor-bound man like Lord Jason's not going to go so far as to get his own heir killed. It worked. So the Mallisters had to kind of sit out for a bit there. Now, what was Lord Jason's reaction, though? He wasn't there. I'm sure he would have been really mad, really distraught, because he wouldn't have known at first that Patrick survived until he would probably received word that, hey, your son's a hostage of ours. Do what we say or else. That would be a very mixed message. He'd be like, well, screw you and your demands, but I'm sure glad my son's alive. And he would understand why. They're like, yeah, they kept my son as a hostage to keep me in check. And, well, damn it, it's going to work for now. I'm sure he'd be trying to find a way out of that, but in the short term, not much you can do about it. In fact, while Patrick and Lord Jason were fighting for Robb Stark, another Mallister was getting ready to lose an election to Robb's heir. So let's head north for a segue, then we'll return to these doings in the War of the Five Kings and Lord Jason and Patrick and the Freys. This part's called Mallister versus Pike. I just love how very Mallister Sir Dennis Mallister is. This guy is possibly the most extreme example of, old proud guy, but not the kind of proud that I dislike. I like Dennis Mallister, and we'll go through why. Here's Sam approaching him. He's fibbing a little bit. He's trying to do his magic with the election, trying to get people to vote for Jon. He's doing his thing. It's pretty clever. Here he's pretending to represent Maester Aemon's wishes. Quote,
Sam took a sip of wine and chose his words with care.
Maester, chained and sworn, it would not be proper for him to be seen as having influenced the choice of Lord Commander.
The old knight smiled, which is why he has not come to me himself. Yes, I quite understand, Samwell. Aemon and I are both old men and wise in such matters. Say what you came to say.
So forward, so upright. You can't even be subtle about intrigue. The thing that you're supposed to be subtle is like, yes, I understand. We're reading between the lines here. We're speaking of things that shouldn't be said. I get it. Do you? I love it. He just can't, no, he has to be polite. He has to be who he is. He is a Mallister. He's proud about everything. And Sam knows that. Sam knows who he's dealing with. He knows that pride, this particular form of pride, it's not the toxic masculinity pride. I want to draw that distinction here. This is the kind of pride that's earned. Mallister has a good reason to be proud. It's not just because of the family he comes from. It's because the family he comes from has earned who they are too. For the most part, right? It's not the unearned confidence of, hey, I'm a Lannister, you should respect me. No, this guy's done things, right? He isn't just a Mallister. He's a Mallister who worked at it, who did his duty, who did his job, who's defended the realm for 50 years or more. I mean, let's give the guy some credit, right? I mean, yeah, he's a bit of a goofball. He's funny in the way he talks, and he's over the top. George is doing that on purpose. Like I said, I think he's the most extreme example of this sort of character. The over proud older guy who's genuinely proud, he's not just puffed up. And I think that's important, and that's part of why I like him. So Sam knows, like I said, Sam knows who he's dealing with. He's egging Sir Dennis on a bit. He knows exactly what he's doing. He's trying to bring up Cotter Pike in order to present Jon Snow as a better alternative. He's like, I'll present the unpalatable option, and then, hey, what about this guy? So here is, I love Sir Dennis's next line. It's more of the same about him just like, yes, I get it. I'm blah, blah, blah. I'm wise and understand. Yeah, here we go. Let's let him do it. Quote.
We are the sons of great lords, you and I. We know the importance of birth, blood, and that early training that can ne'er be replaced. I was a squire at 12, a knight at 18, a champion at 22. I have been the commander at the Shadow Tower for 33 years. Blood, birth, and training have fitted me to deal with kings.
He's not entirely wrong. I mean, again, these are good accomplishments. A knight at 18, that is impressive. Even with his birth, that's impressive. A champion at 22, even more impressive, right? Like, that's legit. He really looks like a Mallister too. I mean, he's silvery from age. He's upright. His spine is straight. He's correct. He's as polite as can be. He changes the words to the more correct, polite version of the word, when he's repeating somebody else. He's got arrogance, sure, definitely arrogance, but he's a good person, right? He's a good guy. Ultimately, this is a guy that would die for you. He would die to defend the realm. So, I'm not going to say too much negative about a person like that. And has done so for so long, dedicated his whole life to it, never complained. Dennis probably assumes a lot about Sam that he assumes about himself. Because, yeah, the Tarleys are a marcher house. They have also a warlike tradition. They are proud, martial. So Dennis is like, yeah, we are cut from the same cloth. He's right, too. Like, Sam is using that against him to get a result. But he knows what he's doing. One of the dragon seeds during the dance was a guy named Silver Dennis, who claimed he was a descendant of Maegor. To me, this is the real Silver Dennis, though, or at least silver and purple Dennis, right? This isn't a man who is unsure of himself, so he's saying things to make himself seem more confident. No, he genuinely is this confident. There's no chip on his shoulder. He doesn't have things to prove, which is why when he is willing to yield to Sam. He's like, yeah, like, I don't need this. I don't need to be Lord Commander to feel whole. I don't need it for my career as a person to feel successful. I don't need that honor. I don't need that job. It's kind of like a Stannis thing where he's like, I'm the best guy for the job. He sees it plainly. There is some arrogance in that, but it's also pride, and he's got a point. He does have a shitload of experience, right? And again, he's a Mallister who was raised in a tradition of defending the realm in a place where they're defending the realm. That's their whole purpose of being there. And it's the west coast of the wall, right? That's when they have, on both coasts, on the wall, they have raiders who get on boats, little rafts sometimes, nothing too fancy, but still they skirt around the wall. And that's kind of the thing that the Mallisters have to deal with too. So it's really familiar. It's not a soft life. You know, you face raiders that are out to kill you and steal people. It's not exactly House Stark, but House Mallister probably has more voluntary Night's Watch joiners than most houses, especially houses outside the North. We obviously don't have numbers on that, but I would feel comfortable betting on that. It's just too similar, right? It's like, hey, I can go do this job up there and I can rise higher here. I can't be the Lord of Seagard. Dennis could never be the Lord of Seagard, but he was this close to being Lord Commander. And Commander of the Shadow Tower is still very honorable. That's a great career. I mean, again, he doesn't need to be promoted again to feel like his life was a success. He's like, well, I could take another step up. I'm the right man for the job. But if not, I will serve whoever is elected and I won't be petty about it. I respect that. Yeah. So he is a little bit, I wonder if he is a little bit like Jon in that sense, without the grand destiny. In other words, someone who was a bit naive about the Night's Watch. Maybe he thought it was a little more knightly, a little more virtuous. But this is a guy that doesn't seem to be bitter about that. He's still very much part of the program. He might look down on Cotter Pike, but he doesn't act like Cotter Pike doesn't deserve to be in the Night's Watch, right? And this is which is, by the way, one of the really cool things about the Night's Watch is that you can have a Mallister and a bastard of Pike on the same team, and maybe they don't love each other, and maybe it's smart to separate them, have one at the Shadow Tower and one at the East Watch, but they're still, that's a feather in the cap of the watch, an eagle feather in this case, I suppose. I wonder too, Dennis Mallister, we don't know when he joined the Watch. Clearly after age 22, because he was a tournament champion at age 22. A little bit of, like I said, a little bit of maybe a Jon Snow not knowing really what he was getting into. Maybe a little bit of Sir Waymar Royce, Waymar Royce obviously didn't last and was even younger. But I used the Royce as an example before of a house that's kind of a Vale comparison. A house that's very martial, very upfront, very upright, very proud of who they are. Their lineage is relatively clean of scandal and conspiracy and rebellion, things like that. Generally, they do the right thing. I wonder what Dennis thought of Balon's rebellion. He's like, oh, damn, for once I wish I was down there. I want to fight the Ironborn. This would have been a chance. He probably would have heard what Lord Jason did and would have been like, yep, that's what we do. That's what Mallisters do. Killing that heir to Pike. 2 thumbs up. It's also no wonder that Sam is up against a lot here. He has to use deception. I mean, he's trying to manage a situation between a Mallister and a Seagard, and a Mallister of Seagard and an Ironborn bastard. And those are really the most opposite you could have in terms of people who are somehow on the same team. And I love this too. One final quote from Dennis. He's more quotable than Jason or any of these other Mallisters. I love it. Even when he's prejudiced, he's proper. He changes words to the more polite version. Here we go. I love this line. Quote.
Pike Well, did you hear him this morning, asking if his grace would wipe his bottom? Samwell, it is not my habit to speak unkindly of my brothers, but let us be frank. The Ironborn are a race of pirates and thieves, and Cotter Pike was raping and murdering when he was still half a boy. Maester Harmoon reads and writes his letters, and has for years. No, loath as I am to disappoint Maester Aemon, I could not, in honor, stand aside for Pike of Eastwatch.
Did you hear him this morning asking if his grace would wipe his bottom? Of course, that is not the phrase Cotter Pike used. He said, he used the term arse, obviously. It's so funny. And, you know, I don't agree with what he's saying here, but Cotter Pike was raping and murdering when he was still half a boy, because that is what the Ironborn teach a lot of their people. But they're not a race of pirates and thieves. That's not true. There's a lot of them. A lot of them are that, but it's still a relatively small percentage. This is the ones that you've dealt with all your life and your family has. Most of them are just, you know, fishing or trading. Still, it's still funny. I love this exchange. Sam's conversations here with him and Cotter Pike are really entertaining. And you can see how Jon is able, or how Sam is able to get through to Sir Dennis by bringing up Jon's qualities. He's like, yeah, Jon's a bastard, but he's the son of Winterfell. He was chosen by Lord Commander Mormont. He's related to the First Ranger. He's the brother of a king. Like, that speaks to a man like Dennis. He's like, yeah, actually, that's a pretty good list of connections and birth and stuff, you know? And it's enough. It's enough. Like, Sir Dennis, again, he wasn't like, I have to be the Lord Commander or I'm a failure, or I'm going to be ashamed if this young man is promoted above me. Nah, that's not how he feels. His pride is legit. It's earned and it's sincere. So it's not going to be touched too much by Jon being promoted over him. He handles it. He's like, you be a good Lord Commander. I'm here to support you. But, you know, we're not going to forget that you're a young man and need advice. That's basically his reaction. And I respect that. Again, it's a good example of non-toxic masculinity. Yeah, he's arrogant. He talks down to people, but he backs up everything. He's earned it. You know, he's done his job. People who do their job should get some credit, right? And his job is hard. You know, he is a very privileged man, but he worked at that privilege. He made the most of it, right? He's not a guy who sat back and was like, I was born rich. I'm going to slack off and live that way. Now, this guy worked. So it's hard for me to find negative things about him, even though I did say some negative things about him. I feel like if a Sandor Clegane grew up with Sir Dennis as a brother instead of Gregor, like, he would be proud to be Sir Sandor, I think, you know? And it makes me wonder about people like Victarion. What if Victarion had been born a Mallister? Is this a real, like, nature-nurture kind of thing? Like, if he had been brought up in that culture, he might have been the biggest terror against the Ironborn instead of one who is a terror of the Ironborn, right? I made the same point talking about Victarion in our Valar Arita series. Like, what if Victarion had been born a Stark? He seems just like too bought into whatever he's in to change. So if he was born a Stark of Winterfell, he would be all about it, you know? But he's a Greyjoy. That's that. So let's leave the Black Brothers for Black Walder, a character whose personality you will not find me praising, unlike Sir Dennis, but I definitely want to know what he's going to do next. He's an interesting character, that's for sure. Under Black Walder. Black Walder put Seagard under siege after the Red Wedding and rode there with Patrick Mallister, threatening to hang him. A real contrast to what the Freys did at Riverrun. The Freys threatened to hang Edmure Tully, and Blackfish called their bluff. Good example of knowing who's bluffing and who isn't. Lord Jason is a tough man, but when he saw Black Walder with his heir threatening to hang, he's like, that guy will go through with it just to prove he will. I can't allow him to. I can't do that. He's going to do it. Black Walder knows his own reputation. Black Walder knows that if he doesn't follow through with a threat, then he's no longer as scary. He doesn't want to hang Patrick, but if he's got to do it to maintain his reputation, he won't think twice. Unlike the Freys, who were bluffing, and Jaime called them out on that after Blackfish did. So Jason's not going to test Black Walder's reputation because someone else already dead, and he knows what's going to happen. Interestingly, there's a Wendell Frey at Seagard serving as page. This is a son of Lord Walder. This is not a grandson, great-grandson, whatever. This is the 19th son of Lord Walder with his most recent wife, Inara Faring. Wendell is 14 years old, but rumors have it that Black Walder is his actual father. So Black Walder is holding this castle by force, and maybe his own son is there as a page. And see, notably, Lord Jason knew better than to say, well, if you kill Patrick, I'll kill this Wendell Frey. He knew that wouldn't work. It's like, that'd be one way to just get his son killed and then be like, now I got to follow through with this threat. I don't want to do that. That's not very honorable. So, of course, he's not going to walk down that road. Again, Mallister's very practiced at not getting in too deep. You don't even get started. Don't even take one step down that path, because the next thing you know, you'll be 10 steps down that path, then 20, and then next thing you know, that's your family reputation. So as things stand right now, Black Walder is ruling Seagard with the Mallisters as prisoners. Like Jason and Patrick are there just prisoners in their own castle, and they're near the twins. Right. I remember we talked about that earlier. This is close by. You saw that on the map, most likely. If you didn't, well, you can see any time. Maybe a shade will put it right back up here. All right, there you go. See, look how close that is. So Black Walder could bring more men fairly quickly if he needed. He can communicate back and forth with the twins pretty quickly. But Nina reminds us that only Edwin Frey, not the most competent, fearsome man, even among Freys, and maybe Little Walda are the only two in his way to being direct heir of the twins. If those two are out of the way, and Little Walda arguably already is, because I don't think a little girl's going to inherit the twins, would have been like Black Walder's around, then it's all set up for him. And Black Walder obviously wants to rule the crossing. His family seems to know that. We know that. So if something happens at the twins, Black Walder may have to leave Seagard in a hurry in order to take his shot to grab the title. He wouldn't just abandon it, but he might have to leave in a hurry, leaving a subordinate there, which might be the opportunity that the Mallisters need to break free. Which brings us to Where Eagles Dare. Thanks to Matt Reeves for reminding me to use this phrase. It's also a really good Iron Maiden song. It's a sort of a World War II reference, among other things. Earlier in the episode, when discussing the lay of the land, among other things, it's a great song. Discussing the lay of the land, we pointed out that the twins are not far from Seagard, of course. I keep bringing that up. It's being used against them right now. Being that proximity to the twins is a bad thing because of the nearby extra bad guys. But let's see how that could change really quickly. Again, Black Walder could be pulled to the twins for reasons of succession or opportunity, but it could also be because of our projected / theorized eventual Red Wedding 2.0. If there's a wedding at the twins, Black Walder might just miss it. He might just stay at Seagard, but probably not because it's so close. He probably goes to it while bringing his hostages with him, have them attend as well. And if something goes wrong, if the Brother Without Banners, if Blackfish, if Arya, if who knows, if all the different players that are against the twins in this area, if they rise up and bring justice / revenge to the proceedings, the Mallisters might be right there and just get freed in the middle of it all. In time to join the bloodshed, perhaps. That could be like a reverse of the Red Wedding, where Patrick and Jason's hands were tied. Well, Jason wasn't even at the Red Wedding, but his hands were tied immediately as if he was. They could be unleashed in the midst of it. That would be really cool. This, by the way, could be more than enough for them to reclaim rule of their own castle, let alone what else might happen. The chaos of that. Like, how is Black Walder going to hold Seagard when the twins is just in chaos, right? And that might even allow them to move on the Lannisters. The Lannisters have all sorts of problems happening. Jaime was captured. Cersei's not doing so well. The young Griff is on his way, So that's potentially an opening to move there. Again, as I pointed out very early in the episode, I believe in the intro, the Mallister strength has not been spent. They haven't lost a lot of soldiers in the War of Five Kings. They are perhaps one of the Riverlands houses that has the most remaining strength. Big deal, which is part of why it's going to be hard for the Freys to hold them in check, and part of why the Freys might be at risk from the Mallisters, because that strength is just a few miles away, or a few leagues away, however far. Not far. Yes. Remember what I said before about Lord Jason jesting with Blackfish at Catelyn's wedding. That may have been a way to show a connection between those two that could bear fruit later, such as in this scenario. For all we know, Blackfish and Lord Jason have already been in contact. Maybe not because of the whole, Black Walder ruling Seagard and all, but that's a guy he would want to hook up with. That's a natural team right there, I'm sure that both Blackfish and Jason want to get justice for what was done to Robb, and beyond what the Freys did. Well, it wasn't just the Freys. It was the Boltons. It was the Lannisters. It doesn't end with Walder. It doesn't end with lame Lothar and the rest. It ends with Lannisters and Boltons. Speaking of Boltons and the North, let's not forget, Lord Jason knows that Robb's heir is Jon Snow. He's one of the few. He has presumably told Patrick by now. They're just chilling in captivity in their own castle. May as well talk about that and other things. So there's a couple of possibilities there. They go north to fight the others. They go north to deliver the news to Jon Snow. They do both. They go north to deliver the news to Jon Snow, to bow before him as their new king, and they're still up there when things break loose in the wall. A lot of possibilities, but a lot of reasons that could draw them north, especially because if their main job is to fight the Ironborn, Euron doesn't give a crap about them right now. Euron he skipped them. He skipped the Lannisters. He went straight to the Shield Islands and then went around there and attacked the Arbor, and now he's sending the Iron Fleet with Victarion to get dragons. He could care less about Seagard. So I think Seagard can say, well, all the Ironborn in the world are either on the Shields or in Slaver's Bay. Actually, we can leave our castle for a while, for once that us leaving won't give them an opportunity, because they're not there. The Ironborn aren't at Pike. The Ironborn aren't on the Iron Islands. Most of their military strength is in the field, or in the sea, or at the Arbor. Yeah, not at Pike, not on the Iron Isles. So Seagard is unusually positioned to say, hey, actually, for once, us being needed elsewhere, we can actually go do that. And I think that somewhere is, yes, there's things to do in the Riverlands, but I think more longer term, Mallister's in the north. That's my simpler prediction. More, if I want to get more specific with it, I'll say, yeah, Lord Jason and Patrick fighting against the undead at Winterfell. Now, what about what happens if Lord Jason doesn't make it? Like, that will change a lot. That's a big pivot point here. I think, yes, despite my prediction that they go north, a thing that could change that would be the death of Lord Jason, because I don't know that Patrick is, again, cut from the same cloth. He likes to drink. He likes to chase women. Now, maybe Jason Mallister did that too when he was younger, and maybe becoming Lord will mature him a bit. It wouldn't be the strangest thing ever. But this is not a guy who's got war experience. He hasn't fought a whole lot. He's got a little bit. He did fight at the Whispering Wood, Battle of Camps, all that, but has he even killed a man? I don't know. I don't know that he has. So it would be a very different outlook if Patrick is at the top. That said, this is really the only of two possibilities. There's Jason leading, Patrick leading, or maybe they both die and the house is just off page for a while because they can't do anything without a leader. I doubt that. I doubt George set them up this way to just kind of do nothing in the long term. It would be easy enough to include them. There's a reason he saved them, and their strength is still there. From a meta perspective, I think George has plans for them. I think all this suggests that very strongly. Hard to be too sure about what, but they're deeply involved in both the intrigue and the succession in the north, and have the military strength to do the fighting in a number of different places. So there's a lot they could be involved with, a lot they should be involved with. So I have pretty high expectations, y'all. Trivia question. Let's see here. The third house mentioned in all of A Song of Ice and Fire is Mallister. The question was to name one or both of the first two. I didn't actually name them during this, in that context, although both the names were mentioned. Usually I reveal the answer during. I didn't actually do that this time. It's Royce and Mormont. Of course, Royce, because Waymar Royce. Mormont, maybe less obvious, but he gets mentioned because of Lord Commander. You might have guessed Targaryen because of Aemon. Aemon's name is stated, but not Targaryen, just Aemon. And you might have guessed Baratheon because he's the king. And Waymar Royce does shout out Robert's name, but doesn't say Baratheon. It just says, for Robert. And actually, that comes after the name Mallister anyway. So there you go. Royce and Mormont and Mallister, the first 3 houses mentioned in all of A Song of Ice and Fire. Other episodes that you might want to check out that have relation to this one, the Battle of the Trident, the abduction of Lyanna, Brendan Blackfish episode. He's got a whole one. The Riddle of Robb's Will. Of course, the Mallister's involvement in that we've talked about, and this is a couple different looks at it, a little more extensive coverage there. And of course, not super related to the Mallisters, but it was their first mention, and we did talk about how their connection to the Night's Watch is something a little different. That would be Aziz versus the Prologue. We have an episode where I just discussed the prologue and break it down, and it's pretty good, if I do say so myself. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you hanging out with us today, whether you're catching this live or you're catching the edited version on whatever platform you happen to be catching it on. We certainly appreciate you listening. We appreciate your feedback. Our feedback is a big deal to us. It helps drive engagement, and it's motivating. We like it when you all comment and tell us the parts about the episodes you like the most. And hey, if you've got some negative feedback, some negative criticisms, we'll take that too. You know, that's how we make the show better. Thanks again to Nina for her great takes, her notes and suggestions and thoughts. A lot of times I just talk things through with her. It isn't always things she just puts directly in the document. You know, just I bounce ideas off of her. Again, happy birthday, Nina. And don't forget to check out goodqueenalley.tumblr.com. Also, thanks to Joey and Jesse for our intro music and outro music. And thanks to Michael Klarfeld for our video intro. It's so very cool. We love it. And the maps that you saw during the episode, some of them anyway, are Michael Klarfeld's maps too. So there you go. Not all of them, but some of them. You can get his maps from at claridox.de. You can just download the file and go take it to a Kinko's or something like that. Get it printed in whatever size you want. That's what we did. That's where these came from. Pretty, it's cheaper than you think, most likely. On behalf of Ashea, I'm Aziz. We'll see you next time for more. You know what to do until then. Valar Rereadus.